Welcome to Cut the Bull, an insightful podcast which addresses the news of the day and the cultural issues plaguing our society, bringing logic and context to these topics and discussing solutions too real for mainstream pundits. Now, here are your hosts, Charles Love and Wilfred Riley.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Bull. I am Charles Love, alongside my co-host Wilfred Riley. Joining us for the conversation this week again is Christy Kelly. Vote for her. She's running for something that they made up in Arizona, corporate commissioner or something like that. And our guest this week is Fatimah Gilliam, author of Race Rules, What Your Black Friend Won't Tell You. I'm laughing at you, Will. And there's I don't have a hard copy, but you can see the poster of the book back there. Fatimah, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
Well, it is great to have you, and kudos to you for coming on, because we try to find people who with varying ideas to come on, and we've had some, but it's hard. They all think we're going to attack them or something, and they won't come on. Like, oh, come on. But if you go back and look at them, when they do come on, they have a great time. So I'm glad you're here, and I want to start off by asking you, like anyone else who wrote a book, why did you write the book, and why are you speaking directly to whites?
So I started writing this book a little over 5 years ago, and I was watching the news one day, and I was watching another story of a Karen going viral for calling the police for no reason. And as I started to watch this news broadcast, I thought of several different things. I thought about my personal lived experiences. I thought about the rinse and repeat questions that I get from friends or colleagues around issues of race. And I also thought about the things that white people say around me when they don't realize I'm Black. And so as I thought about all of that while watching the news broadcast, I had an aha moment and I thought, white people need a manual. So I'm going to write that manual. And so that was the germination. Go ahead, Charles.
Oh, I thought you were done. You paused. Go ahead.
I said that was the germination for it. Mm-hmm. Sorry, say that again.
I said, I'll get used to how you speak over a few minutes, but you paused and I thought you were done. I didn't want to interrupt you, but.
No, that was pretty much it. That's how the idea was born. And I also started thinking about other books that are out there on race. You know, a lot of books seem to fall into several different, key categories. It's either somebody telling their personal story, and then through that personal story, it informs their relationship with America and how they see race and racism in society, or it's an academic book that may talk about structures and systems and history, or it might be written by a journalist. Right. And I think those can be helpful books for people to sit back and say, oh, okay, well, now I can understand aspects of American society better. But then what?
Right.
Like no one is really tackling the then what. And I'm in the advice game. I thought people needed advice. I saw a gap there. And so I wanted to respond to that missing piece of like, what can people actually do? So that's what I wrote about.
Gotcha. Now, I got to go to Will, because the thing you said that when you mentioned why you wrote it, it struck me. And I look at, a lot of people listen, but a lot of people will obviously watch this as well. And they can see Christy and I, and they can see you and Will. And because you mentioned things that they say around, I never thought about that until I read your book, until you mentioned it. So Will, anything that you want to say about that, you're open to or welcome to do so. But I'm also thinking that as the lighter skinned brother and sister on the panel, that is there something that you get a view into whites' views of race that Christy and I won't see because they won't say stuff around us, and that we may be missing out on? Does Fatimah have a point about having a unique perspective there?
Maybe a little, but I guess my own experience has been that the things I've heard from white friends and so on have been profoundly non-shocking. And I guess, again, a lot of this goes into background. So like, Charles, you and I have talked on some of these shows about growing up in working class neighborhoods, all that. Like when I was a kid, and I think we were both athletes in high school, like many people were playfully but sort of openly racist. So, I mean, I have a buddy named Marcus Jackson who's very dark-skinned. And when he and I used to play Park League basketball, the audiences, who are mostly Black, would refer to us as like Sunshine and Midnight, for example. Like I'd go into the game and people would be like, the sun is rising. So I mean, in terms of the idea that people are sometimes mildly racially biased and will express that if they think you're a member of the group, yeah, sometimes. I mean, I've heard that from that sort of thing from a lot of black guys who know I'm black about white women especially.
Hmm.
I've heard it from Hispanics who think I'm Hispanic. I mean, a few times I've heard white people say prejudiced stuff because they assumed I might be Caucasian, but I think actually a bit less than most other groups.
Hmm.
So I don't know. I mean, I find the idea interesting. Like this book actually sounds like it could be hilariously funny if it's written with a sense of humor. I've read parts of it. So I mean, the idea of like a manual for race relations as someone who writes books is a great book idea.
Hmm.
But the one sentence response was I think it'd be just as easy to write a race relations manual for blacks or Latinos. If you had a sense of humor and you were speaking to a non-woke audience, like learn to speak fucking English. Like you could imagine the things that you would put in there and the reactions that the majority of human beings would have to them. Not that most Latinos don't speak English, but for Black Americans, you can think of 10 or 15 things immediately, what to do in movie theaters, libraries, so on down the line. So yes, I think these descriptions are almost certainly real. People do that. I don't think that's white exclusive in my experience. And I also think that that's part of a larger picture where in a blue collar area, a lot of people just openly tell you what they think.
Right.
Like, you're too light skinned to go out with my daughter, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
So it's a mix. It's an interesting world out there.
I'm curious, Wilfred, how often do people think that you're white? I'm just, I'm just curious about that.
Well, it depends. I mean, so as a kid, actually, the thing that I was pegged, so I'm from Chicago originally. Like, I was born on the south side of Chicago, Chicago. I lived as a young gun in Wicker Park, kind of pre-gentrification, like the arts district of the city. And I mean, other than maybe New York, maybe San Francisco, I mean, that's one of the most diverse areas in North America. So the idea of white meant something a bit different from what it does in Appalachia in Kentucky. I mean, we had Italian Americans, Lebanese cats. I mean, all sorts of people, and I look like I could be a member of many of those groups. So the idea was rarely all that relevant that someone wearing Dockers and a polo shirt would take me aside and assume I was a brother of his and say, I never really liked those Negroes. But I've certainly more than most people had a lot of people assume that as a whimsical, like light brown skinned guy during the summer, I'm a member of their group, which could be very specific. It could be a Greek friend's dad or something like that, and be very honest with me about their opinions of general American society, whites, blacks, gays, so on down the line. My the situation in which I've most heard this, by the way, again, not to at all detract from the point of the book, but would actually be people who assumed as a younger man that I was sort of a bro, a goon, and I would have strong prejudices against, say, gays or women. So, I mean, for a while, when people would say something extremely homophobic, I would actually just say, "Oh, you probably assumed I was straight." And I actually am straight, but the reactions to that were just absolutely off the wall hilarious, and it toned down the group of men a little bit. So I think that I'm pretty race fluid, and because of that, I've heard a lot of honesty from different people. Again, maybe because I'm obviously not a blonde from the Upper East Coast, or just because they're no more racist than anyone else. I've heard less of this from kind of classical Anglo whites than almost any other group, really.
I mean, I've heard, I've heard inappropriate jokes. I've also heard the N word, or when people say, and they say that because they don't realize I'm black and they're using the N word. Or I've heard people say things, or once I, say, well, I'm black and I, make that clear to them, then they may say things like, well, you don't have to say that you're black. Like you could just say that you're white. And I'm like, that's not the lane that I'm in. That's not what I'm trying to do.
That's very
And
good
I
point.
and I find that offensive because to me, when somebody says that to me, it's implying that there's something derelict or problematic with being a black person.
Course. I
Right.
mean, so obviously, like actual race. I mean, this show leans to probably the center, right? But of course, actual racism exists. If someone takes you aside, assumes you're a white sister or whatever the term would be, and says, "Excuse the language, but I hate niggers," you'd almost be one of us. Like, yes, of course, that person is actually a severe bigot. I in my life with family friends who assumed I was some kind of Caucasian. I don't. never really heard anyone say that. And again, the balance would be I've heard a lot of inappropriate, racist, and again, far more homophobic and sexist comments from people who just kind of assumed I was on squad.
Right.
I don't want to ramble on. I think my only two observations here would be that was really racially diverse, like blacks and whites about even, maybe Latinos a little less, just so on down the line. It was not a one group thing. Um, that's actually pretty much the core point. Heard that across the board, heard that about a range of groups, and never to the point of extreme bizarreness. I can't imagine saying, well, I'm actually black and native, and someone else saying, well, you don't have to say that these days or something like that. So that's interesting. You had that experience.
Well,
I've
Chrissy,
had it
what would
many
you?
times. Oh, sorry.
Chris,
Go ahead, Charles.
yeah, I want to see what Chrissy has said.
Yeah, I was going to say 2 points. It definitely resonated what you just said, Will, where people, once they think that you're one of them or you're on the team or you're on the squad, like you said, Will, then they're free and they will be themselves, whoever that is. I think it's less about, maybe that you look, white or people perceive you to be white. The thing that kind of hit me over the head in just the first opening chapters is how much attention you paid to race and to the differences between you being light skinned and fair. And I know that you were trying to set the tone for the book, but when you said whites often don't feel threatened by looking at me, I was kind of like, ooh, so is that to assume that they would feel threatened by, someone who maybe is of a darker skin? Because, I think I can see that you're Black, but mainly because I have a biracial daughter. So I think most people could see like, oh, she's mixed or there's a little something in there. So I was
I
just
mean, I see myself, like if I see someone that looks like me, I would say, okay, that person's not white, they're mixed. If I saw Wilfred, I would think the same thing, but that doesn't mean that white people see it or recognize it all the time, as evidenced by people that come up to me and speak all kinds of, Russian or whatever language they come up and speak to me in, or make assumptions. But yes, I mean, I think there is, there are large segments of the population who look at brown skinned people and are afraid of them and are threatened by them, which is why people cross the street, which is why someone gets followed around in a store, which is why somebody grabs their purse when they see a black or a brown person. And so that's what I meant by that. But yes, I mean, the whole book is definitely about race, and I've elected to write it to white people. But I see that while I've written it to white people, I see it as being beneficial for people of color as well in a couple of different ways. So, I'm trying to provide it, tips and advice for white people so that they could better engage with people of color. But then it could also be helpful for a Black person or a person of color who might be looking for, talking points when they're having a conversation, or maybe they're struggling and figuring out like how to articulate something. And so then the book brings into written form what they may be feeling and experiencing. And then I also see the book as a leave me alone and go away kind of a book and leave me in peace. So for the person who's like tired of answering these questions all the time, like, somebody says, oh, I have a question about tokenism, or how do I apologize, or cultural appropriation, or color blindness, or whatever these topics are, taking a knee, voting rights, all of these different chapters that I've covered. And, a person of color is just tired of feeling that they have to answer these. They could say, oh, you have a question about, taking a knee or Black Lives Matter? Like, look at chapter 12, she covered it, and I'm going to go about my life, And so I see it's also helpful for people of color too, in that regard.
Got you. I do want to go back to one thing you were saying when you were explaining being light skinned and things you hear. Will said something right before, and I interrupted you to let Chrissy get in, but you were going to say, you were talking about how you've heard these things, like you've heard off-color jokes, they say nigger and all this kind of stuff to you. I'm wondering how often that happens.
I mean, it happens, like the N word is not like an everyday occurrence, but people say things to me like all the time, my entire life, I'm hearing things. So, I don't sit there and I don't count how frequently it happens. You know what I mean?
But I mean, and over time too. But I mean, like in the last 3 or 4 years, would you say it's monthly or every few
more
months?
than monthly.
Really?
Yeah. All the time. I mean, I'm just thinking about, it was interesting. A friend of mine invited me to go to a Seder, like a Passover Seder.
Yeah.
And so I went, because I'm one of these people like, I'm down to experience anything. So sure, I'll go to your Passover Seder. And so, so I go to the Passover Seder, and there was a mix of people there. Like not everyone was Jewish because I'm not Jewish. And, they may even have some atheists there. And so, and it was a multicultural, multi-religious group. And I was still in the process of finishing up my book. And so we had this whole conversation about my book and what I was writing about, and the book title being like Race Rules, What Your Black Friend Won't Tell You. Whole conversation. And then one of the people at the dinner was like, it's interesting you're writing this book as a white person. And I was like, really? Really? Like you missed the whole conversation that we were just talking about? And why would I title a book saying what your black friend won't tell you if I'm a white person? That seemed a little odd to me. But my point is, I'm getting mistaken for being being a white person all the time. And
Oh, yeah,
I
but
didn't
that's a
see that
little
as being
different
like,
than the racist stuff, though. That's just they look at you and they think you're white, right?
yes, right. But then that person also, I can't remember the exact example, but there were a couple of things that came along in that conversation that I was
Oh,
like,
okay.
okay, that's a little problematic. I
Right.
don't remember like all of the
Right.
little things that came along. But I mean, my point is that people say things to me frequently that I find problematic and offensive. And they do it when they don't think I'm white, and they do it when they do think I'm white. So it happens in both instances. And I think sometimes people get comfortable with me just generally, you know, maybe especially like in my professional work too, right? So the fact that I went to Wellesley and then I went to Harvard and then I went to Columbia, and somehow I passed some sort of muster of like of professionalism, and people get comfortable around that too. And then they start speaking freely.
Hmm. Go ahead, Will.
One question that I would ask there very briefly. I mean, your experience may well be different from mine, but at least in my own experience, whether it's among very fairly aggressive black male buddies who know I'm black, or it's white friends, parents who might think I'm Caucasian or something like that, I almost never hear people break into sort of ranting racial slurs. So I mean, do you draw a distinction between that and things that you might personally find offensive or annoying? Because I think in that second category, if you're at a dinner party with a bunch of people drinking, that could be sort of every third comment. I don't know if there'd be a highly elevated level of that if people knew what your racial identity was. But do you kind of separate those, or do those go together in terms of things that white folks should be trained not to do?
I mean, I think some of these things are on a spectrum, right? Some of them are more egregious, and then others are in the, microaggression category that's just casual racism, and then it all sort of adds up, and some of it comes from the same place. I mean, I think that people unknowingly engage in things that are problematic and offensive, and that's why I wrote the book, to illuminate them, to show them a better way. And I think this book also helps people navigate polarizing issues. Like people are going to be on different spectrums. So I'm sure my political beliefs probably are not aligned with the three of you guys, right? And 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 that's okay. I mean, I think people need to have conversations, right? I'm not allergic to speaking to somebody whose beliefs I don't agree with, right? But in terms of like around race, specifically, I'm talking about people of color and white people. Like at the end of the day, whether people agree or disagree, like they still have to get along, right? They still have to work with someone, they still have to live with someone, be neighbors with someone, right? That's not going to change. And, people may not agree with everything that I've said in the book. They may think some of it is problematic, but my point is I'm trying to show people a pathway on how they can engage in a different and better way that's less offensive, right? And maybe that's not offensive for everyone, but it's offensive for people that might be in the hump of the bell curve. And in doing so, then they can start establishing stronger, more positive relationships with people of color, and they can start building trust. So I'm just trying to give people the pathway. What they choose to do with that information once I share it with them is on them, but that's part of my goal.
Right.
No, I mean, obviously, just as a brief repost to that. I mean, I read the book or the PDF we got. I thought a lot of it was quite interesting. But one of my impressions is that virtually anything you might say could offend someone. And an extreme focus on not offending people is something that's become characteristic of kind of left-wing urban culture over the past 10 years. And you're now seeing more and more of it on the right. You know, you speak against the Lord Jesus sort of stuff. And in practice, for example, earlier today, a friend of mine is a Catholic priest, Father John Nagel, and he spent about 5 minutes passionately telling me that abortion is baby killing. And I don't get offended by much, but I found that sort of annoying. I don't really agree with him. But I don't know if it would improve conversation to not to feel a deep sense of pain or offense at each comment of this kind. I would imagine that many things that someone could say in the arena of race, like, I have no problem with players kneeling for the anthem because America is a systemically racist country, as versus those overpaid whiny bastards should get up and earn their money. I think either of those could offend probably half of a table, but I think both of them are perfectly within the range of sort of normal conversation. I would just laugh at the two guys going back and forth with each other. So I guess the only point is I do think that most people would find a distinction between that and if you're perceived as being a member of someone's in group, they're secretly extraordinarily racist in the conventional sense. I don't know. I don't really much care about offending people when expressing myself, and I think it's pretty healthy.
Fatima, I
I
know you don't
mean,
want to comment on that, but I want to add a question on that because it's kind of tied to that. Feel free to comment on. But my question was even if we disagree with Will and say it's good that you challenge them for these things that they may be doing that may be offensive. I wonder what your thoughts are on how people may take it because it may come off as heavy-handed in a sense, right? Because it's written to say like whites do this and whites say this and they shouldn't say this and whites need to correct. Stop asking us to learn. Go educate yourself, right? So is he right? You were going to comment on what Will just said, but if it is still beneficial to kind of correct the behavior, is it do you see that some of the people, especially since the audience that you're writing for are white, would think it's a little heavy-handed and be kind of recoil at the way that you express it?
I think it is important to correct the behavior because a lot of people find that behavior offensive, right? And what's going to happen is the person isn't just going to say, I'm offended by that. They're going to think that person is racist. They're not
Right.
going to trust them. They're not going to want to be friends with them. So I think it is important to get to the behavior. In terms of, do you want me to call you Will or Wilfred?
Will is fine.
Okay, Will.
Almost everyone calls me Will in practice.
Okay, because I've been saying Wilfred and then you said Will. Okay.
Oh yeah, I don't really care.
You know I'm bad. Don't make me mess up again,
I'm
Fatima.
sorry. I'm not trying to create any issues.
Yeah,
Okay,
there's no
well,
tension that's going
for
to come
Will's
out of this,
point,
which is kind of the
I
point,
mean,
I think.
to your question, I think some people are snowflakes. I'm not going to pretend like there aren't. There are a lot of people who just overly get offended left and right, and some people are searching to be offended. But I think there's a distinction between that and someone, really feeling marginalized by someone else because of who they are. Right. Not and so I think that is something that we definitely need to move beyond. The other thing too, though, in the book, yes, I am talking about things that are going to be offensive and things to avoid, but I go beyond that, right? So that's like one aspect of what I'm covering in the book, right? So when I have a whole chapter that's talking about voting rights, that's less about somebody being offended versus somebody wanting to make sure that their civil rights are enforced. Or when I'm talking about things that go to housing policy or education, and some of these bigger issues, I'm going beyond just how people get offended, and I'm also focusing on behaviors and decisions, whether that's at the individual level, institutional level, or policy level, or political level, that have negative impacts on people of color. So I'm going beyond just those kinds of things.
And I want to
I'm not
talk
sure
about.
if
Oh, go
I, oh,
ahead.
go ahead.
What were we going
No,
to
I
say?
was just going to ask, but I don't know if I fully answered your question, Chris. So if I missed okay, cool.
And we're going to get to those. I just want to ask, were you going to say something, Chrissy? I was going to ask you a question.
I did. I had a quick question. So
Okay.
I'm just kind of struck on who the audience of this book is. Like, who do you expect to read it? Because from my perception, you seem to go from wanting them to be allies to be anti-racist or help you fight racist, which means it's
Disruptors.
it's mainly for the white progressive person who's
No,
going to be
she
the
calls
person
them racist too.
I do.
I actually like that part.
but I'm
I actually
talking
like
about
that
the
part.
called
Just because
person.
you
They're all
voted for Barack
masochists.
Obama and you went to a BLM rally, you still a racist ass racist.
Right. But I'm
I
saying
love that shit. They'll buy
it's the
1,000
it's
copies.
the white progressive who's already trying. They're already, trying to meet you halfway. They already agree that they're racist. And it seems like you're saying, like, no, that's not good enough. So I don't know how far this book is going to move the needle versus maybe speaking to, white, maybe conservatives or white, just independents. It seems like you're already speaking to people who are on your wing of the spectrum. And the other thing, because I don't get to talk that much, but the other thing I wanted to say is we are very similar, you and I, in, education and age, I think. And so I just wonder how we can be so different, where it seems like you've had a lot of instances of racism or seen racism in
Because
things.
they think she's white, so they open up to her. Young dark ass. They can look at you and tell they can't say stuff around you.
That is true, but my first husband was white. So moving, you didn't know that, huh? Moving in white circles, there would also be that, familiar feeling where they drop their guard. And I can probably count, on both hands the number of times in my lifetime that I really feel like I've experienced racism. So I'm just wondering, it has to go back to maybe sensitivity factor or maybe
I don't think it's sensitivity. Because I mean, people say, really, I mean, maybe you could say it's subjective, but things that they really should not say to someone. And some of this is coming from liberals, it's coming from Democrats, from people who are like, think that because they voted for Obama, that that's some sort of pass that they have, or some sort of shield and protecting them from somehow being racist. But what was the first part of your statement? Because I wanted to make sure I got to that before you were talking.
She said that you were that you may be
my target audience. My target audience. Sorry,
because I
about
disagreed
that,
with her, and I was going to say that. That's why I remember what she said. I'm on your side, Fatima.
I actually think
so
the
this is
target
what I was
audience
going
for
to
the
say to
book is
that.
ideal for just pure business
Yes,
reasons.
Will.
But I don't want to jump in.
So my book is helpful for, I mean, who do I think is going to pick up my book? Do I think a bunch of people who would vote for Biden and Obama would pick up this book? Yes, most definitely. Do I think somebody who's like on the far side that's going to show up at a Unite the Right rally is going to pick up this book? No, I don't think they're my target demographic whatsoever. But do I think the Republican conservative person who still has to function in the marketplace and work effectively with other people that may want to learn some tools and tips along the way to better engage, the book is also helpful for them too, wherever they are on the political spectrum. But do I think that, the bulk of the people maybe be somewhat more converted, the ones that are like, ooh, I'm signing up to do this work, right? I mean, I don't even try to pretend that I'm being diplomatic in the book, right? I'm intentionally uncomfortable with candor, ripping the Band-Aid off and saying the quiet part out loud because I actually don't believe that the diplomatic approach is helpful. I think at some point somebody has to be courageous and say the quiet part out loud. So I'm just raising my hand to do it. And I know that not everybody will like it, but how are you ever going to learn if nobody ever says anything? I think about it this way. You could have two people that have an encounter. You can have a white person and a person of color, right? And they have some exchange, a conversation, whatever takes place. And they can walk away from that exchange with two completely divergent impressions of what went down. Right? You could have the white person and they think, okay, we're cool with each other. Maybe there was a misunderstanding, but we're still okay. We're cool. And then you could have the person of color could say, I felt really, marginalized. I felt something racist happened to me in that conversation. I really can't stand that person. I dread the fact that we're going to be in the next meeting together, or they're going to be at my friend's wedding party, that I have to see them over the weekend, or that they're married to my sister, and so I'm trying to help people see a different way, a different pathway. And if I'm just dancing around and worried about how people are going to feel about it when I say it, then how are they ever going to learn? So that's why I'm just being, extremely candid in my approach.
Well,
And go ahead, Charles. Go ahead.
well, the reason I think that on that one thing, I think that I get what you're doing and why I disagree with Christy is that her point was, I get her point is that you're writing for the people who already agree with you. But the point of what it says in the book is saying, well, you're not really doing what you say you're doing. In a sense, she's saying what people on the right are saying. It's saying you're mouthing certain things, but your actions are no different. You're doing stuff. You're not doing it for blacks or to improve racism. You're doing it for yourself. You're like, man, I feel better because I did this. So
Virtue
from that
signaling.
regard, she's right. And if she can get them to read it and see that, that could be beneficial in a sense. And since they're more likely to read it, like Will said, it could have a benefit there. But what I do want to get to is the things you said specifically when you talked about more than just the feeling parts are just microaggressions. You talk about real actionable things that happen, because that obviously, come on, you went to Harvard and you went to Columbia. You did some homework, so you know that we talk about this stuff regularly, that we write about it, and that my biggest takeaway, I think much of a lot of what a lot of these people talk about is rooted in obviously truth. So it's not that it's wrong, but where I kind of question the delivery isn't who the audience is for, it's how the situations are framed. So it's when you talk about like everyday racism, when you say believe black people, but not you, but the narrative has always been believe a black person like Fatima and not Christy. Both black, but if they say something like you just gave a scenario where one person heard this and a person, I can't even say that phrase, I'm saying, it's gonna say, and a people of color, because it sounds so weird to me, but someone who's not white says, well, I took it this way, they're supposed to believe that. But then when someone who is also not white says, I don't look at it that way, the overriding response, not yours necessarily, definitely not in this conversation, but what you get is they discount that, right? I'm on the school board here in New York, and I get called racist all the time because I don't agree with the leftists. I just think you're wrong. You have the right to say what you want to say. I'm not mad at you. I just disagree with you. You don't care about black people, right? So the same people, so that's why I agree with her, because the same people are saying believe all black voices, and that they voted for Obama. And I've been to BLM protests. Will then say that, well, he doesn't get to speak even though he's black because he's not saying what I want him to say. But what I'm saying is a lot of the points that you make about those issues, voters' rights issue, the history of discrimination against blacks and things of that nature are very, they're nuanced topics with a very finite and definitive, I guess, kind of, one-sided in some case view of what that situation is, and it's written as this is the gospel. This is the finality on whatever that thing is. So what do you say to that on how some of those things are addressed in the book?
I mean, I guess what I'm focused on is more so like what's in the hump of the bell curve. I mean, there are always going to be outliers, and we're not monolithic, and we're not going to always agree on everything. Like I'm not going to agree with probably 99.9% of the things that Clarence Thomas says. Just won't, and
but what
and so
makes him not, but what makes the people who don't agree with you outliers is, I guess, what I'm saying. You're not saying that we're not a monolith.
Do you guys mind if I jump in with kind of the poli-sci version of this question?
Right.
So, Charles, it sounds like what you're asking is, in this case, Fatima, it seems like there's an assumption that some people who have one perspective on what's actually a very heated debate are just kind of wrong. And you see this a lot from the political left, and you see this a lot from the political right. You especially see this when race relations comes up, where people will actually say things like believe all POC or believe all women, the famous line from Me Too a couple of years back. So, I mean, when you pitched the book just now, you said, well, I'm not being especially diplomatic here. I'm a good writer. I think I make a point, so I'm just going out and saying it. To which I say, I mean, good. But the obvious response is, why should other people spend so much time trying to be diplomatic in response, I think. And we see
who are
this
the other
very often.
people?
Well, the entire book is written to essentially liberal whites to tell them how to behave better around minorities. And I think that if I showed this to any of my friends, they'd probably think you're a good writer, but they would just say, I don't fucking care. If someone doesn't like me, they can not hang out with me. You know, at work, we have certain baseline rules and we all follow them. We all show up in ties. We don't use direct insults. But I mean, for example, if we're talking about any conversation you could have, like after work hours, the abortion conversation with this priest earlier, or a debate about race, where someone would say, I view the USA as a systemically racist country, which is a defensible position, although I disagree with it. And someone else would say, well, in the United States, 8 of the 10 richest groups are minorities. This is correct, Indians, Nigerians, and so on. And those two people were to start bantering back and forth. A common position that I encounter on the campus is that one of those positions is wrong, and the guy who's saying it should shut up. But I think a lot of people would ask why. Like that's kind of what Charles is saying. If a black guy disagrees with the argument that racism is everywhere, or a white guy does, why would they not just say that? If someone gets offended by it, why is the assumption that the offended person is correct? And just one very quick comment about that, like, so in terms of the hump of the bell curve, one of the things we've all on this show, I think Christy as well, have done is look at perceptions of police shootings in the USA. And the average liberal, urban, white, or black guy across both races thinks that about 10,000 unarmed black men every year are killed by the cops. So if someone thinks that and is offended if you counter it, you can understand that, but it seems relevant to point out that it's complete nonsense. Like the actual number of unarmed black men killed by the cops every year at 20. So I guess why would any particular group be more diplomatic than any other? Like black Americans aren't known for our diplomacy.
Well, I mean, if people don't want to be diplomatic, they don't have to be diplomatic. Doesn't mean that people aren't going to,
Great blunt answer.
I mean, I'm not being diplomatic. Somebody doesn't want to be diplomatic with me, that's their right, and I'm equally not diplomatic with liberals as well. I mean, not just in terms of this book, I'm thinking about how I wrote an article that was in the Hill a week ago that I'm, plenty of people were not happy with, friends, because I basically wrote an article that said, Joe Biden has to work harder to earn this black woman's vote. And I came hard in that article and said why I have significant problems with Joe Biden and why I find it challenging to vote for him because I think that he takes my vote for granted, and then a lot of people then counter that, like texting me and things like that, friends and family, saying, well, what's your alternative? And they don't agree with me. And we're like going back and forth, and so my point in bringing this up is I want people to, feel free to express what they want. That doesn't mean however they express it, there won't be consequences, not necessarily with this Biden article, but in terms of if somebody's like, yeah, I want to call you the N-word. Okay, you can call me the N-word. That's your free, you can say that. We could figure out whether or not at some point that enters into the category of being a hate crime, but you can say what you want to say. Just doesn't mean there aren't going to be consequences for it. And those consequences could be that maybe you get ostracized, maybe you get canceled, and the person might be all upset about the fact that they got canceled. Maybe they was legitimately canceled because there are, ramifications for the way that people engage and behave. I mean, if someone wants to disagree with me, black people included, they have every right to do that. And I'm not saying that I represent
outliers, though. That's the issue.
I do, because I actually do believe that the opinion that I do believe that what I'm saying is what the majority of people, of black people think.
In this case, though, the majority,
I do believe that.
Oh, and you're arguing it very well, but in this case, the majority position for most white or most black Americans and white liberals is that 10,000 men are murdered every year by the cops. So it doesn't really matter whether you're an outlier or not if you disagree with that, because what you're saying is true.
I mean, I think Charles's point's a little different. I haven't looked at the statistics or the data that you're quoting, but
Washington Post police shootings database.
Fine, whatever. But my point is that that I do think that what I am putting forth is still where most people of color, or I can't say all people, but where most black people will feel. And what I'm trying to do is I'm telling people this is where a lot of people feel, this is how, how they see things. And if you want to better engage with a significant portion of the population, here is a pathway, here is a guidebook that can help you better engage. And people can decide, say, oh, I think this is trash and throw it away, or not. Sorry, I see, Charles, you're trying to ask something.
Christy Kelly, I got two questions.
Yeah.
If you want to piggyback with what you were about to say, I saw you were about to open your mouth. But to that, she said a key word. She said, a lot of people feel. And that's what Will is trying to drive home. But sometimes your feelings are wrong. So we're supposed to discount the fact.
Some of what I'm saying is fact, too.
But
so, like, let's take, for example, like my voting rights
though.
chapter.
But not to the police shooting. But not to the police
I can't
shooting.
speak to that data. I can't speak to that data because I haven't looked at it. I'm not discounting what Will is saying. I just haven't read it, so I can't opine on it.
I actually think you're probably right on voting rights, and I'm correct on police shootings. I mean, I wrote a paper about it. So, but I mean, I think there are issues that are pretty settled. Like, of course, there was deprivation of voting rights in the USA for much of history. Of course, cops aren't actually murdering people. But I guess my point is just, it's a little different from Charles's point. I want to hear what Christy's going to answer. Just I keep saying very briefly and lying, but just I think the issue here is that everybody kind of likes to hear themselves talk. And so you hear people say this all the time, like, well, you have a right to express yourself, but there are certain things that are just kind of true. And what that means, and this is just as true on the right, usually when I hear it, is kind of Marcuse repressive tolerance. I think these are the positions you should be able to express. And I don't think that's exactly what you're saying in the book. But the obvious question is, like, you came on a mostly right-leaning show, seem to be having fun. Everyone's being quite blunt, talking back and forth. And I think that's how most people talk. And I think if I were a white liberal, I'd have kind of a whipped dog feeling right now. Like, people are writing me whole books telling me how not to offend any black. Get out of here. Like, I don't see why anyone looking at how normal conservative whites, urban blacks, how normal Americans talk would necessarily feel the need to go through X number of pages of etiquette training. Yours was quite enjoyable, but like, why is this one group expected to do this, I think? And if they have some psychological motivation to do it, I think the book will sell well. But I do not personally understand that and follow an older path. There's not really a question.
I think that there are plenty of people who are just, not everybody wants to take themselves on as a project, right? So there are plenty of people who are like, well, the way the system is feels like it's working for me, so why change anything up? Or why do I have to care about other people? I think there are plenty of folks that will feel that way, right? Or just,
everyone
I don't
cares
feel like
at a
feeling
baseline level about
I don't
other
feel
people,
like
but
feeling guilty, or I don't feel like, drudging this stuff up. So I'm just gonna, go about my life and go to Disneyland and just keep it moving, right? I mean,
this amorally seems likely to make my life worse, I think, is how I would approach a lot of liberal policy projects. Like, you should give much more of your income to these group of people that dislike you.
But the bigger point here is it's not just about feelings, right? It's also about, like, what is the impact of the decisions that people are engaging in, and not just in terms of someone walking up to you and say, hey, Will, you're the N, whatever, you know what I mean? Or I think you're, some terrible black man, you know what I mean?
Or just shove the guy and we both go on with our lives. I mean, that's
I'm not just talking about it like on an individual basis, but when people are making decisions that are impacting the culture of an organization where somebody works, where they're impacting decisions that may support segregation, right? Because, like, here in the Northeast, it's one of the most segregated parts of the country, surprisingly, and people think it's all down south, but that's just not the truth, right? And so I'm not just talking about someone feeling a certain way, but I'm talking about decisions that support and create the caste system that we have in this country. Now, maybe
but you're asking those against human nature, because you're asking the people you claim benefit from it to give up their benefits.
Potentially, but at the same time, I think racism hurts white people too. I mean, I think this country's competitive advantage is diversity, right? So if we have data out there that talks about how if you have a more diverse company, you're going to have a higher profit, more return on investment, more profit, lower turnover rates, right? Because it's really expensive to hire people. You're going to have, if you have corporate board diversity, still your company is going to be performing better. There are all of these different indicators, right, that indicate that diversity is a financial value add for a company, which you can extrapolate then as a financial value add for our economy. And if we are one of the most diverse countries on the planet, then that means our competitive advantage relative to the rest of the world is our diversity, and we are not leveraging it.
You gotta
So
let Chrissy Kelly talk.
So when you talk about the bell curve and you
Mhm.
speaking for the bell curve, which I
Mhm.
don't believe, I don't believe that's necessarily true. So I don't think that the average Black person feels that their biggest problem is, how white people need to do work or become a project. I think that we have bigger issues that we can be focusing on versus rather than thinking that they need to do work. So do you ever think about what work our community needs to do rather than putting the onus on, white progressives to do the work?
I do think about what Black people need to do, but that's not what I decided to write about in this book. I
This-
decided to write about the people that need to focus on dismantling the structures that they uphold and they created. My next book could focus on things that people of color could do, but this is what I chose to do with this specific book and focus on this specific population because we
And
can't just go ahead.
yeah, I understand that. And I guess I go back to the audience, right? So I'm thinking about, the white people that are kneeling and washing the feet of Black people and, feeling this white guilt, or Nancy Pelosi in the Capitol with the kente cloth bending on one knee, feeling this white
I mean,
guilt.
she could have, stayed away from that photo op. I did not
Some
need
people
that
are just
person.
praying.
So I just don't know, again, how much it's going to really move the needle if the people that you're, appealing, or the people that would pick it up, because most people in my circle, I mean, it was hard for me to read, honestly. And that brings me also to me talking about the bell curve. How many conservative friends do you have? How many?
I do have so I have some, a couple. I mean, I don't roll with a ton of them, but I'm thinking about like my best friends. A couple of my best friends, they voted for Donald Trump.
She had to side first.
Twice.
She went.
It's a wise move. Stop the invasion, build
Why
the
you
wall.
messing
all
with
that.
And I will say one of my friends, right? When I was writing my white welfare chapter, the 7th race rule, and I needed to trim it down because it was too long, and I also wanted to get feedback on if there were questions that I left unanswered, right? And so I called, this one friend up and I said, I need you to read this chapter and give me some feedback. And she was like hemming and hawing and everything. And I said, look, you need to take one for the team. Okay. You need to read the chapter and tell me where to trim it down and let me know what you thought
And she's
of
like,
it.
all of it.
No. She read it. And she pointed out the areas where she thought I should, she had some questions. So I addressed those. And then afterwards I said to her, okay, so you gave me your feedback for the chapter to like improve it. What did you think of the chapter? And she said, you proved your point. Like I can't debate the point that you laid out in that chapter. It was very
I
convincing.
could, but I don't have time.
Okay, fine. You didn't like race rule number 7,
You brought
my
it up
white
at the end of
welfare
the hour.
chapter.
We can do part 2, and we can do a whole hour of me how you did not prove your point. But I can't do that now. I'm kidding. But I get
But to Christy's question, yes, I do have some conservative friends, but I'm not trying to sound like that person who's like, I have a Black friend. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not trying to sound like that, but yeah, I have friends from a broad range of political ideologies and beliefs and religions and the like. I don't have any friends that storm the Capitol. I can't claim to have friends.
you should have come on here a few months ago.
We have a very
I
close
could have had
friend
you
that
on with
was
something.
So I have
out of
no
sheer
Capitol
curiosity, are
storming.
any of the
I have
conservative
no
friends
Capitol
Black?
storming friends, but
You got any
but
precinct burning friends?
huh?
Hell, I said you got any precinct burning friends?
Precinct burning?
Yeah, from the
No,
BLM riots before the
I knew
Capitol
that
riot.
that is where he was going, but most Black Lives Matter rallies have absolutely no violence
I know you
whatsoever.
said most, but that doesn't mean that the ones that happened didn't happen.
I
Yeah,
hear you, but
only
if it's only
Right.
7% out of, you
I
know,
didn't ask about the percent. I just
well,
asked if you had any
that's
friends
kind
who
of an
burned the police
insane
precinct.
figure. Like only 7% of our political meetings degenerated into violent riots. Like, I mean,
no,
that
but the
is
news, no, but I
absolutely
mean,
off the
no, but the
charts
point
nuts.
is on the news, they make it seem like they're all full of people that are like
Exhibit.
burning police
Well,
stations
They
down.
said they were peaceful
well,
on
there
the
were
news.
guys,
Most of
like
them are peaceful.
Right. So
just
they
as one
weren't, you
wonky
can't say,
data
so you
comment,
can't
there
agree
were
with
like
them saying they're peaceful
8,000
and then say
BLM
that they made
rallies.
it seem like they
So
were
that's,
violent.
I mean, there were about 600 riots. Like, there's a list of the riots. It's just like 0.07 times 8,000. Like, there were a whole bunch. I mean, like in
Very
Minneapolis, the
few,
entire Lake
very
Street
few.
business
And a
district
lot
was
of, and the statistics
no,
show that a lot of the violence was actually sparked by the police themselves.
no, I mean,
Does
it
it?
was sparked by the police themselves in the sense that when people started rioting, the
Throwing
cops fought
frozen
them. I
water
And then
mean,
they
bottles
like
had
at them.
those whole,
they
you know,
burnt
like those
down a police
infiltrator
station
people
in
that were like,
Minneapolis.
Well,
Like
and
there
then
was a
had,
was it
medieval
infiltrators or
battle,
was
and the
it the
cops
police?
surrendered the station. People on both sides were like carrying their wounded. Like this can't be erased from history.
I know this is just going to be one where we are just not going to agree. But I see
Well,
Christy trying.
I
No,
mean,
Christy's
wait,
trying to.
wait,
I'm
wait.
not trying to help Christy out. I'm trying to help the other female in this. She's got a word that she
Right.
wants to get in.
In full disclosure, I do know a lot of J6ers and they are nice people. So I'll just leave that there.
Fatima
Full
said they were trying
disclosure.
to take over the government. They all
I
should be
actually
That
shot.
would
know a
be
lot
a
of
whole different
J6ers and
conversation.
BLM
Those
rioters
J6ers,
continuing my
I want to
poster
see a
boy
bunch
for
of them in
ethics.
orange jumpers is what I want to see.
They're already in a non-disclosed location, aren't they? Isn't that no?
Wait, what'd you
Wait,
say?
They're already in a non-disclosed
they're
location.
just
They're
in the
locked up.
DC city jail. They just put them in seg. But actually, I agree with Fatima on that. Like, I don't want to see more young men going to jail, whatever the political background, depending on the crime. But like, when I saw the January 6th riot, my immediate reaction was like, these guys are going to go to jail for a long time. Like, it wasn't anything moral or anything like that. It was like when you saw like old boy walk out of the Capitol with the lectern, it was just like, what does this guy think he's doing?
Right.
Like, obviously, if they don't shoot him now, someone's going to track him down wherever he may
And shoot
live
him
and
then.
find him. And that's what
I
they
have to say
did.
this. I have to say this about some of the Jan Sixers. Okay, like if you are going to engage in insurrection and storm the
It was
Capitol,
not an insurrection.
okay, we're going to have to disagree on that
Well, yeah, of
one.
course, it wasn't an
But if
organized rebellion, but
if
if you are,
you're going to do that, you can't show up with and be upset with your dietary restrictions, like the QAnon shaman guy who was all upset. Like you are clearly violating the law. You're on the floor of Congress. You've broken all these rules, and then now you're complaining that they don't have your vegan diet or whatever.
But and this is really taking a left turn. But
Sorry about that.
I think it's a right turn, but go on.
Because if you watch them, the security guard or the cop open the door, they're walking through through the partition lines. I actually know the QAnon shaman. He's actually like a minister. He's a really nice guy.
He's a nice guy, Fatima.
Who got a prison sentence that was well deserved.
He's actually out and he's running for Congress. So
I know
he got out on
he's
good
out.
time.
I
He's
don't
been
think
out.
he's
Yeah.
going to be able to.
He follows me on Twitter. I'm sure he
Yeah,
follows.
he's
follows us on Twitter.
actually he leads a prayer every week at the at the Capitol. I mean, I don't go.
I mean, you would
We're not,
think as
but-
part of his probation deal, he wouldn't be able to go there. But I mean, like the January 6ers, like the one distinction between January 6th and the BLM riots is that it happened once, not 600 times, and people actually went to prison. Like I actually followed up on what
Or need
happened
to
with the
go to
Mag
prison.
Mile looting in Chicago, where people were driving trucks into the front of like Gucci and Versace stores and stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of stuff. And nothing happened. I think there were 8
Nothing.
people jailed all time. There were many symbols like that. I mean, the Mag Mile, the famous old courthouse in downtown Portland.
But Will, I am less bothered by somebody who, and again, clearly I've already said, the looting, the rioting related to the BLM, it's a small fraction. But let's say even if it were a larger number, which it was not, because statistically that's not how it played out. But I am less bothered by somebody who's going to loot a Gucci purse versus somebody that's trying to upend democracy, because the impact of the two is completely different.
I
But
think a
there's
lot
no
of that is
potential.
CNN.
Well, I want
talking
to hear what
points.
Christy said, but there's no potential impact of the second. Like if you beat the cops and
Get
get in the
shot.
Capitol for 10 minutes, it's not capture the flag. Like you're not then the king. I mean, like,
Right. If they were
if that
overturning the
were our
government, they would
system,
have
I
been
mean, I'd have
shot.
some very interesting political ideas in mind for the next couple of years, but it's not. Like, another wave of cops comes in and they shoot you. Like, the congressmen were all out by this point. There was no risk to the democratic system at all. Like, if there's a critique of Trump, the better
I
critique
think the
of Trump
police
is
officers
actually
that were like impaled, that got, sprayed, that were harmed would say completely different things.
there were no police officers impaled, which means killed with a stake. There was one guy sprayed with bear spray. There was a cop who died the next day or the day after that for probably
Died the next
unrelated
day.
regions.
Sicknick,
No, but I mean
Brian
the idea,
Sicknick.
yeah, Brian Sicknick, good officer. But the idea, this guy was one of many, many undeserving people. Michael Brown comes to mind, that were presented as sort of a martyr by just scum level left-wing media. Like, he died for our country, he was out there in battle, great guy. But no, he didn't. He died the next day from still unexplained causes. People tried
Okay,
to
we
count
are
cops that
straight up
committed
never going to
suicide.
agree on this
Right.
because
Can we lightning round real
you
quick?
guys
January 6th
think that
death
this was
list
not
includes a
an
guy who committed
insurrection,
suicide
Yeah.
and
2
I
Can we?
months
straight up
later.
see
All
it
right.
as
All
they're
right.
trying to
Everybody,
upend
three.
democracy.
Okay. Let's lightning round because we run out of time. So I got to ask you, why color blindness is racist?
Wait, sorry.
Yeah, you. Why color blindness is racist?
Color blindness is racist because it negates people's realities. A lot of times when somebody says, "Oh, I'm color," speaking as if the person were white, "Oh, I'm colorblind," right? I don't believe that we should look at color. What they're typically saying is that their color is not negatively impacting them, and in doing so, then they're negating the fact that that somebody's race and color impacts the outcomes and opportunities of another person. And I think instead we should be color aware, color conscious. We should recognize the role that race and color plays in people's lives.
But isn't that the opposite of what you can agree with it or not? But that's not what people mean when they say colorblind, is it? Don't they mean
I
that
think
we
it's
don't want to
exactly,
judge you based on your color? So
but
so
we
so
are
if
judging. No,
I
no,
know, but they're
instead what
saying
it
that we
means
should
is,
stop.
but what I'm saying is then when someone is going to say we should not be looking at this, then it means that we don't have to start coming up with initiatives and policies that try to correct for the fact that there's bias and discrimination
No, they're
along
saying
the
that there
way.
shouldn't be bias and discrimination. That's what they're saying. They might be wrong. They might be living in a fantasy world, but be
We're in
fair.
a fantasy world.
But be fair to what they're saying. What they're saying is, oh, I don't want people to be discriminated against because of their skin color. I don't want them treated poorly or better because of their skin color. That's what they mean by it.
That's what they mean and hope, but we're not there, right?
Well, that's
So it's
okay.
coming from an analysis of thinking that we're in some sort of post-racial world when we're not in a
Well,
post-racial
now I
world.
agree with that, but I felt like the book was saying that they don't mean, was changing what they mean, saying you don't mean what you say. This is what you mean, right? It's saying that they mean something different from what they're really arguing. And like you, they made their point clear about what they meant. So it wasn't what you might be saying, that like what you described them saying wasn't really what they were saying.
I think that's the case for some people, and I think for a whole bunch of other people, they're
They're just
trying to
using it.
just go out there and say, I don't see anything. And it's like, that's not true. You're not blind. You're not literally blind. You notice it, you recognize it. And instead, it's just a way of trying to reject the reality that race is somehow a part of the equation.
Gotcha.
So yes, there could be some people that might be saying it, and they're saying it in a way that they're trying to signal that I'm not trying to be discriminatory. I'm not trying to do these kinds of things. But even still, when the person does it that way, they're still in some way negating some reality. And instead, I'm just saying, like, let's not pretend like we're all walking around legally blind. That's just not true. The reality is we see these things. Let's recognize it so we could do something about it.
Well, what are your thoughts, if any, on my wonderful co-host Wilfred Riley's book on hate crime and the hoaxes, the hoaxes of the hate crimes?
Okay,
the fact
I've
that
not
many
read
of
your
them are
book.
hoaxes.
I have not read your book, Will, but I did look at several of your interviews and a whole like 1 hour interview with you
We're down the
about your
Wilfred
book.
Riley rabbit hole.
And when I listened to it, I was like, I totally don't agree with this man, no, at all.
Right.
And
See, I'm the nice
but
one.
but I'm like, he's expressing his view, and I haven't read some of the underlying data and things like that you referenced. But when I was listening to it, I was like, it felt like, you might be like jumping on cases here and there to negate the fact that,
How many cases were there, Wilfred?
I'm glad. So, I mean, first of all, I'd be glad to just send along a copy of the book and actually see what you think of it. But no, the one of the things that, first of all, I don't think the majority of reported hate crimes, like brawls outside hip hop clubs or country bars after close or sexual assaults or something, are hoaxes. The point of the book was that I looked at the 20 or so most prominent sort of hate stories in the national media, like Yasmin Saweed's hijab, some of the Karen stories, Jussie Smollett, Covington Catholic, Air Force Academy, a couple on the alt-right as well, and they were just all bullshit. Like none of them were true. Like of the most widely reported 20, I believe 18 were fakes. And I had a similar experience.
Uh-oh, he
Oh no!
disappeared.
Why'd you do that to him, Fatima?
I didn't do it. I didn't do it.
I was looking forward to the two of you talk because you wrote a whole chapter about Karen. He literally debunked the fact that there are no Karens. Stop lying. I just wanted to see you two talk. I mean, not none.
There
He
are
didn't say they're
Karens, and
none.
I
He didn't
encounter
say
them
they're none. No,
frequently.
he didn't say
He'll
they're none.
probably jump back on.
Yeah, he'll be back. But he didn't say they're none. But the prominent ones, that we hear about, the girl at Yale. I mean, he wrote pieces about all those specific stories. The bird watching weirdos. I thought both of those people were weird. Both of those people were weird to me.
Wait, are you talking about
Yeah, Cooper.
Amy Cooper?
Amy and the weird Cooper guys. Both of them were weirdos. That whole thing. The first time I heard this story, I said, it's two weirdos. Both weird.
She should not have called the police.
But Christy Kelly.
Yes, sir.
You say you don't get to talk. Will's gone. Go.
What do you tell the next generation? And I'll give you an example. Nowadays, the kids, when I hear the N-word or when I hear the N-word being used, it's not for necessarily a white person calling a black person, but it's two Mexicans calling each other the N-word, or it's white kids are using it to call other white kids. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if you have children. I mean, I have teenagers, so I'm, very versed in how their peers speak. But what are you teaching the next generation? Because I feel like they have a different reality.
So we kind of lost the battle on that word, is what you're thinking?
I think we've lost I think we've lost the word. I think it's lost its meaning. It's lost its potency. I mean, I still don't use it. I don't teach my children to use it. But when you're having white skater kids, I remember, 15 years ago being at a bank and hearing the N-word, and I turned around getting ready to be offended, and it's two white kids calling each other the N-word. And I politely told them, hey, if the wrong person hears you using this, it could be a problem for you. It's not okay. But now it's even worse to where they just, freely use it.
To me, I don't think anyone should be using the N-word. And I don't think it's lost its value. I mean, not its value, but I don't think it's lost its initial definition. So, and I don't believe in the whole taking the term back. Because if someone were to walk up to you as a black woman and call you the N-word, you would still take that as somebody engaging in, hate speech with you, right? You wouldn't just say, oh, let me pound the person. We're happy to meet a new person, right? That's not the reaction that you would have. It would, be offensive to you because it's a word that's got so much historical baggage wrapped up in it. And it's a part of trying to diminish, hurt, and harm.
But for the kids nowadays,
kids, they need to stop using it too. I don't care if it's a white person saying it to another white person.
Do you think it's rooted in racism the way they use it now? Because they use it freely to call each other.
I know, I've heard it. It's terrible.
So would you say that it's still rooted in racism?
I think it is still rooted in, I think it is definitely still rooted in racism because it still harms people, right? People are still using it in a harmful way. So its power has not been diminished, right? Even when a black person uses it with another black person in a casual, friendly way, or if they're using it to demean and degrade another black person, right? Or if you have two people of a completely non-black race saying it to each other, it still upholds the value. I don't like the word being used in music. I think it just enables it to continue to have life, in perpetuity, and just lets the term go global. And then it lets people think that it is okay to use that term. So no, I think the younger generation needs to stop using it, and so do older people too.
And Wilford Riley's back to talk about hate crime hoaxes and Karens.
Yeah, my computer's about to die, guys. Yeah, so no, what the point of the book Hate Crime Hoax was that all of the incidents that were extremely high profile during this period basically turned out to be fakes. And I was curious, there'd been a similar experience in Chicago a couple of years ago. I mean, when I was a grad student, one of the bars some of my friends used to dance at is called Velvet Rope Ultra Lounge. It was focused on like bisexual students,
I remember
trendy on
that.
ferns and so on. You remember the place?
That was the cocktail waitress thing. The incident.
No,
What was the incident?
no, Velvet Rope, just the club, was the guy who burnt down his own club and spray painted all these awful gay slurs
Oh
through the
yeah.
place, like fag die and all that sort of stuff. And he was caught years later, famous insurance fraud case. I mean, one of the best known really in history. So all of these hate crimes were reported within a period of about a year and a half in Chicago. University of Chicago student named Derek Cockeline claimed that he was being threatened with murder and rape by an entire hacker group that he called the U Chicago Electronic Army. A student at Wisconsin Parkside in our northern suburbs claimed that there were nooses and sort of death lists for all the black students on campus left around the campus. And in every case, just long story short, it turned out these were fakes. So I became curious about how often does this happen? How often are these very high profile claims of like racial hostility just not real? And when I got a chance to write the book years later during a summer, it turned out that at least most of the ones we were obsessing about at the time weren't. So there's a data set right now of about 1,000 of these cases, which again isn't the majority of hate crimes. I mean, there are only 7,000 hate crimes reported in a
Well,
typical year, and most
let
of
me
them are okay.
I'm curious to know this, right? So, okay, so if you decided to focus on this with your research, right, and then to write this book, my question for you then is, are you concerned that people are going to use that, right? Because there's some people who just don't want to believe that hate crimes are real, or that they're like legitimate hate crimes out there, right? So, are you concerned that someone is going to, or groups of people, will take that and use that as an excuse to undermine or devalue legitimate hate crime claims?
Not really, no. I mean, legitimate hate crime. So, first of all, I think that truth has a value. This is something that's commonly said, and this one I don't think is on the right as well. I only see this on the political left. But people will look at very obvious claims, like all else being equal, being a single mother probably isn't ideal, or men commit the large majority of crime for genetic reasons. I can think of about 10 my friends are debating on social media right now. And kind of just under the surface, the idea that's expressed is, well, that's clearly true, but you shouldn't say it because it'll give people the wrong idea. And I think the response there is, well, that might also give people the right idea. People might decide that there are some techniques you can use in law enforcement to counter fake claims, for example. People might take something that they've been saying in these sleazy little side rooms on the internet and subject it to actual discussion and get shot down when it comes to the claim there are no real hate
They
crimes.
might stop faking.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Yeah, people might stop wasting police time with all these damn fakes. I mean, like in one year, it was 15% of all of the incidents. It had to be at least across a couple of the states. So, and they were all concentrated, by the way, in a very specific area. They were all on college campuses,
Midwest.
prep school campuses, the grad schools when those were separate. A huge majority of them. So, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but the basic answer is no. Like, I think an actual hate crime is going to be investigated by detectives at the local police department who are going to, for good or ill, put as much effort into that as they do into most things. But I think that what I want to have happen is that when people see some incredibly high profile story, black guy beats up white guy beats up black guy, cop murders a man, they spend a day or so looking into what actually happened before assuming that there's an actual symbolic martyr here. And I think people doing that over the past couple of years would have dramatically improved race and class relations in America. Like, again, like virtually none of these stories, like Michael Brown, hands up, don't shoot, turned out to be true.
And last thing before your computer dies, can you speak about the Karens, the barbecue? I thought your computer was dying. Barbecue Becky, the sleeping at Yale, all the Karens, because she writes a chapter about Karens.
Sure. I mean, so yeah, that the Karen stories were another thing. I wrote an article for commentary where I looked into these Karen stories, and like I said, I lean like center right politically. My starting bias was probably a lot of this gonna be bullshit, but I was reporting it fairly. I mean, there were a couple that turned out to be true, but for the large majority of the Karen stories, like I mean, Barbecue Becky was someone who confronted a group of people that were grilling in sort of a small dog run area of a park where you're not supposed to grill.
In
One of the
Oakland,
people.
right?
Yeah, one of the but yeah, and that was like the least sympathetic. But like it goes up to someone who was a pregnant nurse who got into a dispute about a bike with five young black
I
guys
remember
who
that
was
one. That was in New
accused of
York City.
who was accused of trying to steal the bike from the five young black guys and ended up producing receipts and so on. And my take on this would actually be kind of a flip of my take on quote unquote epidemic black crime, which you see a lot of in edge right media. Generally, when people are pointing out a phenomenon that you don't see very much in your day-to-day life in a way that sounds ridiculous and exaggerated, like that nurse was about to beat up all six of them, it's bullshit. And that's what we very often found. So
But
yeah, my
do you feel like the Central Park Karen Amy Cooper was BS?
I think that one is that one's a situation where both people acted like assholes, but where again the white
But how is
and
the birdwatcher guy an asshole?
well, because the birdwatcher guy was saying absolutely crazy stuff. So if you actually follow this story, because like I'm a decent investigative journalist, as much as it hurts for an academic to say that, but I mean, like, if you actually go into like New York parents forums and look up both these people, and I've talked to Amy Cooper and I've at least sent messages to Christian Cooper. I don't really have beef with either of them. Amy seems like a
I
nice
mean, I'm
person
hoping
generally.
she's Canadian and somehow she could be deported, but you know.
No, she's not going anywhere. But no,
She went to
the
school in
language
Canada.
she's
I
talking
had
about.
hope.
the situation that actually happened there was that this woman is jogging in the park and she's got her dog running off the lead. So
Off leash.
yeah, a terrible leash your dog. But this
Ooh.
big guy comes out of the woods and starts saying things like, I'm going to do something to you and that animal that you're not going to like. And starts reaching into his bag where apparently he's got a box of dog treats just so he can screw with people who let their dogs run in the park. He's a bird watcher. And both these
Maybe the
people have
birds
been
like dog
documented in
food.
like the neighborhood groups on like jackassery in the park, right? So he starts doing this crazy thing. And then she's like, big man, a big black man. Like, I don't really want to mock either one of them cruelly, but it's just this urban altercation accelerates.
Well, Will, the
No one's
bottom
hurt.
line is one, she shouldn't have been in the park with her dog, not
True.
being on a leash.
True.
Okay,
Hate those
that's
people.
issue
Want to
number
punch them in the
one.
face.
And you know, it irritates me to no end in Central Park. These people running wild with their Cujos.
I'm a
Okay.
New Yorker like
And
you.
then-
I'm on your side. But my dog's nice. Well, you like your dog. I don't. I'm on your side.
Right. Okay.
The
I'm
thing
with
is, like,
Charles
real
on that
if
one.
this
And
had
the
been a big
second
white guy
issue,
that's like, I'm gonna do something to you you really don't want, little lady.
no,
Like,
and the
she would
second
be viewed as a
issue
feminist hero
is
by these same dweebs.
the second issue is she should not have called the police, where she straight up said, as she was being recorded by
And
the
fake
Cooper
tears. Don't
guy,
forget the fake tears.
that that she was, you know, that she basically said, I'm, you know, going to tell them that there's a black guy, you know,
Attacking me or something.
It was like a
attacking
big
her, being
black guy
aggressive
threatening
to
or
her.
attacking
You
her,
know,
yeah.
she knew exactly what she was doing. And frankly,
Also
I
true,
mean, I don't
Fatima.
know all of what happened before, but I don't even care what happened before.
Now, see,
It's
that's
just
where
sort
you
of
lose
like,
me. That's where you lose me.
no,
I agree with
no,
you on what she
Guys,
said,
I've
what
gotta
she
get off
called, and I agree with you about her and the dog on the leash. But you don't get to say, I don't care if he did anything wrong too, because
no,
she
no,
shouldn't have
no,
done this.
no,
They were
Charles, let
both
me finish
wrong.
my point. Let me
Okay.
finish my point. It
Okay.
doesn't, the reason why I say I don't care what happened before is because in that instance, when she's calling the police and she is, you know, basically saying, because she knows what the impact is of saying there's a black guy, you know, attacking me or being aggressive towards me, or what, I don't remember her exact language. She knew exactly what she was doing.
And what's
And
the
that
impact?
is,
An
and
important point is that
that
the
is
actual
the
impact is
problem.
nothing.
No, that no worse, Will. The actual impact is you lose your job and you
Yeah,
become.
so this I think is a very important point, and I apologize. I feel like I just jumped in there, but this is something that's very important when people talk about like massive
1950.
white privilege in society. Like, look, I went to law school. We've had institutional affirmative action for about 60 years. Does it counter all racism in society? It's something that can be debated, but the idea that there actually is this force field that's holding you down if you're black. Like all a white lady has to do is call the cops, say big black man, you get shot.
No,
I
because
think
the
a lot of
reality is
people
there's a greater chance that the black person is going to be shot by the
It's
police. And
not.
not
that's
if
why
you
I
And that's
say it
not if
simply
you
doesn't
not
adjust
matter
for
true,
what
it.
happened.
Fatima.
It's the
It's
same like with
not.
Not if
police.
you
It's the
adjust
It's
for
same
not
like with
literal.
true.
police violence. It's the
Yeah,
same
that's
with
not
police
true.
violence, which I'm sure I'll lose Charles with this one too. Like, I don't care what the assailant did prior to, right? Because to me, no, because to me, it is
They find women. Who gives a shit?
what is the appropriate force and response in that moment,
To
right?
shoot
You
him?
could have somebody
Yeah, kill the
no,
guy.
you could have somebody who's wiling out, maybe they have a mental health problem or whatever. Maybe they were aggressive before that, but if they are subdued or if they're not subdued, there's another way to restrain them, then you don't have to respond with deadly force in that moment.
I think that was really well argued, but one of the reasons that the left right now is so sympathetic to these criminal scum is that there are no real civil rights issues. Like, I mean, you can talk about like voting or something, but like again, the Civil Rights Act passed in
Blacks can
1964.
vote.
Yeah, no, blacks can vote. But again, you can talk about IDs and all that. It's an interesting
Blacks
conversation.
can get
But
ID. Oh, okay.
just this one point though, because we're all talking about this.
No,
Everyone's
people can't
passionate.
easily get IDs, but go ahead, Will.
Of
I
course,
interrupted.
black people can get
You can help
IDs.
them. Instead
The
Now
of
reason
that
complaining
is
about it, you can help
racist.
them.
the reason there's a focus on these insane issues, like can grown black men get IDs, is because the major
They
civil
can.
rights
It's
issues were
challenging for
resolved.
some people.
Why can't you
Then
help?
you
Why
got
can't
then
Jay
you don't
Z?
need to be
Why can't
voting.
Jay
If
Z and
it's
Tyler Perry
challenging for
give them
you
the
to
money
get
to
an
help?
ID
Go
as a
find the
grown man,
paperwork and
you
give them the
don't need to
ID.
determine who runs this country. But guys, the one thing
Sorry.
the one thing I'm going to say here though is just the reason that we talk about these obscure civil rights issues, like were the police beating this crackhead too hard after he shot one of them, is that the major civil rights issues in the country are largely resolved. I mean, there's a law that makes it civilly and often criminally illegal to discriminate on the basis of race, sex, so on. We've extended this
Not being
into
enforced appropriately.
we've extended this into positive discrimination that crosses every field. So the one point here really is like at some level, did Amy Cooper think that she could get rid of someone she thought was a creepy rapist, by the way? But did she think she could get rid of this guy by invoking her white privilege? Maybe. But the important
Oh,
moral of
she
the
did.
story is that the white privilege didn't exist. The cops thought both of them were jackasses, left
Because
the
they
scene
were.
in 15 minutes. Yeah. And then she had her career destroyed, and the city came and took her dog. I mean, so it's the same
She
thing
got
again.
her dog back. She got her dog back, but I
She
wish
got
Got
the
a
they would
dog
have
dog.
back.
kept it. She
But
should have lost it by having an unleashed dog in the park.
I'm with you, but Fatima, can I add one piece
No,
to it?
wait, I
Can
gotta
I
say
add?
this. My
Okay.
libertarian roots, you guys and this dog's gotta be leashed. That's just ridiculous.
I don't really
Okay,
care about the
wait,
dog
stop.
thing.
So
That's
you
fine.
get
If
to
people don't want to leash their dogs
Fatima,
in
I got
Central
this one. So
Park,
you
then they
get to
shouldn't
take
be
your
allowed
dog
to
off
have
the
a
leash,
dog
and I
in
get to
Central Park
shoot
at
it
all.
when it runs up on me. Are you cool with that, libertarian? You get to get your dog off the leash in
Batman
the
myself.
concrete jungle of the city, and when your dog runs at me, I get to shoot it. You cool? If we
I-
both cool, we cool. Are you cool, Christy?
I think if the owner is able to restrain their dog,
Can I
control
shoot
their
your dog
dog,
when your
he's
dog jumps on me?
non-aggressive, there
Christy,
should
can I
be a
shoot your
Christy,
dog
law.
when
it
your
is a
dog jumps
shit
on me?
show. It is a shit show in Manhattan in Central Park with
And
these
literally,
unleashed
and
dogs.
I'll
literally.
give you that. I don't live in Central Park. I
A
don't
literal shit
suggest
show
it.
and a figurative shit show.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Right? I mean, it's like there are the steaming divots wherever you walk. There's,
Right.
dog shit everywhere. But the unleashed dog thing is a significant
Right.
issue.
Especially when you
So
carve
people
out
should not be.
spaces for it. You carve out spaces for it. You
There's a
take your
dog
dog where you
park.
can.
We're not having an extended argument over dogs
Okay.
and
But
leashes.
but all I'm saying is what I was the one thing I wanted to add to what Will was saying that you're going to disagree with Fatima, but it's important to get on record because we are recording.
Okay.
Is that the fact that all of the things that the ugly history of this country, which is all true, and said, not saying that you do, but many act like nothing's changed. They say things have changed, but listen, you wrote in the book, you did a chart where you said Jim Crow and Jim Crow 2.0. The way I learned 2.0 is the bigger, stronger version of the original, right? This is the souped up version. So to imply that Jim Crow today, the situations we face as blacks is worse than it was then. And they'll say that's not what you're saying, but that's what 2.0 means. It's like, hey, it's the newer and stronger version.
It's the
even worse than
reboot.
that.
I'm not
So-
even necessarily
so-
saying
so
it's stronger, but
to
it
your
is
using
similar
but let me
to.
finish, Fatima. To using the white privilege, you're talking about the Amy Cooper thing. in today, you have to be honest and say today, 20 years ago, maybe before that, 100% true. But there's no way that in today's culture, with a majority minority police force, that the police are going to show up and just shoot the guy indiscriminately because he's black. That's a fallacy. Anyone who believes that is part of the problem because they're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. You're in New
does
York and I'm
exist.
in New York.
They
You and I both
statistically
know
and
that's not going
continue,
to happen.
they're doing it all the time.
They're shooting blacks when they show up all the time in New York City.
I'm not saying every single time, but the police
all the
are
time, but
the
regularly.
police are statistically
But
more
regularly.
likely to shoot.
But
Go
regularly.
ahead.
Not all the time, but regularly.
More than they should.
Okay. That's no follow-up for that. Do you think that we still need more conversations about race?
I think we do.
You don't think we do it poorly, but we don't think that we as a culture are talking about race too much?
I don't think we're talking about it enough.
Christy, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm with racism is on life support, and we keep, resurrecting it with these,
So we have to keep talking about it. Fatima, we have to keep talking about it. Then we need to talk about it differently. You will agree we need to talk about it differently then, right?
I think we do need to talk about it differently.
Okay.
I just think that, but the three of us may disagree on what that differently looks like.
Oh, okay. Well, how's the feedback on the book been?
I've gotten a lot of really positive feedback from white people as well as people of color. I mean, for example, one of my
Stop saying people of color.
Well, what do you want me to say?
I don't know. Talk about black people and other people of color are not, similar in many ways.
I'm not saying that we're similar.
I know, but you're lumping. But you're lumping. Don't lump me in with those yahoos. Let them fight.
I'm going to say people of color to imply non-white people. I'm not saying that they're all the same, but I'm just saying you asked what the feedback has been. So I'm trying to tell you the feedback that I've gotten from white people and non-white people. And I'm referring to the non-white people as people of color. Okay. So from white people, I've gotten, like, for example, one of my Wellesley friends, she gave the book to, this 82-year-old white guy that she's known since high school. He's sort of like a surrogate uncle to her. Mm-hmm. And she considers him somebody who's like a member of her family. And so she gave him the book and she shared his feedback with me. And he said that he thought it was really illuminating and interesting, and he was enjoying reading it. And he said it got him to really think about how he thought about race and racism differently, and to evaluate how he's been going about interacting with people. And so he thought it was very, very helpful. Mm-hmm. Then people who've read the book who, think they're more developed on the like wokeness spectrum, if you want to call it something. And they too were like, I didn't realize that when I did XYZ thing, that it was problematic. And then people also really appreciated the historical detail that I give in the book. When I talk about like the origins of the country, starting from indigenous genocide to African enslavement, moving through the Homestead Act, moving through the GI Bill and the New Deal, to try to show the linkage of how we have racial wealth gaps today, and how policies and laws have been enforced over time with disparate impact. And people have liked that historical breakdown, including with the voting rights chapter that lays things out. Or I have like little nuggets of history here and there, like how in the 1970s, the government sterilized 25% of indigenous childbearing aged women. And, that's not too long ago. And so people like that sort of thing. And then they really like the translation charts, like where I say, you said this, we heard this. Why don't you say this instead? Because I'm trying to give people an alternative, as opposed to just saying like, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. I'm trying to say, this is bad. Why don't you try this instead? And that can help you have better relationships with people. So as a whole, I've gotten very strong positive feedback. Now, for the extreme, people on the right, I expect them to first of all, not read it.
Yeah, they won't read it, so you won't get any
Definitely
bad
not like
reviews.
it.
Yeah,
Huh?
you won't get any bad reviews. They just won't read it. So how
Well,
can they?
maybe I'll,
Right.
or they may just give me death threats. I don't know.
But why does it have to be extreme people on the right? I would assume that there's some people like my parents who identify as Democratic, even though they're pretty conservative, middle class.
Are your parents white?
What would make you think that?
Because I was talking about white people. So then you said my parents. So then I thought,
Oh,
you're
are you
saying-
only asking critiques from people that are white?
No. I've asked for critiques from different people. Let's just backtrack. I thought you were picking up on my thread, and when you said your
Charles,
parents, and
stop.
I was talking about white people, I thought you were saying your parents were white. So that
No.
Oh, that's so good. It's so funny. It's so.
Thank goodness we're gone.
I'm
No,
sorry.
my
I'm, I'm losing
you
it.
know, I don't know.
my parents are Black, but they do identify as Democrats. So I think my dad just switched to independent, but I grew up really conservative. So again, they're conservatives that don't vote their values, right? But anyways, I would think
You know
that
this is being recorded. But go on.
I would think if they read this, they would have a lot of critiques because it's not the way that I was raised to look at.
They raised you wrong. That's why
So
they
have you
need the book so they can learn.
So from middle down the road, ordinary, not left, not right, just independence, have you had any pushback from them saying, any pushback?
The pushback that I've gotten is more so, okay, wait, before I answer the question, Christy, am I answering the pushback from Black people now? Is that how I'm supposed to think of the question?
I guess I don't draw a difference. I mean, I draw,
Okay.
who reads it and criticism. I don't draw Black or white. I'm just thinking middle, ordinary, down the road people do not identify themselves as, progressive or,
Oh, right, right.
conservative. They just
You mean
are,
non-political people? What do they say?
non-political people. When they read it,
They're not reading it.
pushback.
You got to
Or-
be interested in political stuff to read this. No, it's not a knock on it. It's like you have to be like kind of in this political fight, either on either side to want to read it. If you're like kind of like it's no big deal to me, you're probably not going to want to read it.
Because I think there are people who um can appreciate the book who are middle of the road, but also don't want to be offensive to people that they engage with. And there's some people who frankly may read this book and they may not even care so much about their motivation may be, I don't want to blow up my life, or I don't want to do something in the workplace that's problematic. So there are going to be, different kinds of readers that come to the material. Some people might really want to do the work and then they want to evolve. And then there are going to be some people who are like, just tell me the guardrails so I don't fuck up my life,
Right.
And and that person could be the middle of the road person. But to your question, Christy, about how for the middle of the road person who has read my book and the feedback that I've gotten, some people disagree with some of the stuff that's in there, or they feel, and especially like white people, they get defensive about it. And it's hard for people to not get defensive about it. And that's why I give tips on how to navigate your emotions as you're going through it and having a tough time. But even still, people still, have found, for example, like the illustrations to be thought-provoking and powerful and informative. And they have like some of the tips and the advice that's in there. So I don't expect somebody to take the entire book and say, I accept it all, right? And I've even written it in this sort of like choose your own race knowledge adventure, right? Like I write for the lazy reader because I'm a lazy reader and people like to hop around and they're not going to read, I'm trying to take complex information and like dial it down, distill it in digestible bits. And so somebody, if they just want to read like a token chapter that's only like 4 pages or 5 pages, they could do that and then go to the topics that they need to learn about in real time that work for their life. So I think the book is helpful. I think that, based on the feedback, plenty of people will find it helpful. And then I also know that when I was writing this book, I knew that some people were never going to accept what I was writing, no matter their race. And I wasn't necessarily writing for them. And I wrote this book out of my own personal patriotic duty of wanting to help America progress and evolve and get to a better place.
You satisfied, Chrissy? I only have one more question.
I'm satisfied.
My last question is, may seem like a unique one after this. We covered so much stuff, but I think it kind of makes sense. So in your experience, do you think that Black people are happy?
I think Black people, you know, again, here I'm answering it in some sort of monolithic way, but I think some
Guess we have
people
to
are
speak in
happy and
generalities.
I think some people are happy and I think people are happy about various aspects of their lives,
Mhm.
right? So people might be happy about maybe their career or their friends or their family, or maybe they're not happy about those kinds of things.
Right.
And still can recognize that society still needs to improve, whether that's around, you know, race relations or politics or a broad range of issues. But I think that this country has a long way to go. And I think a lot of people think this country has a long way to go. And I think that it's important not just to sit back and say, oh, okay, there's no more work to do. Let's just start coasting and not give any sort of pushback to society. That's not my mindset with anything in society. You know, that's not how I was raised, and that's not a part of my value system. I think things only improve when you push for change and you try to nudge change. And so that's what I'm trying to achieve with race rules, is push and nudge and get people to see things that they didn't see before and provide it in an area where there's just a gap of not having advice, right? Like, you're going to have these other books, they'll talk about history and systems and what somebody's experience is, and then nobody is saying in any significant way what to do about those things. And so
Christy,
that's what I'm trying to do.
what
I
do
have
you
one
think about that?
question.
Because, but what do you think about that person? You can ask your question after that. But what do you think about that? Because the reason I asked is because I think in her goal of educating white people, both to get them to change, but to get them to understand the landscape of America and how it's seen by Blacks and other people who aren't white, you know that phrase, that it painted a pretty dark, morbid kind of picture of what Black life is like. And one of the things I always write and I'm always concerned about is the white savior. You write, she writes in the book about that, the white savior mentality. And I think a lot of that comes from this stereotypical view of Black life just being such a negative thing that's so bad on every front that they just feel so sorry for you that you have to be Black, right? And I don't like that, but I think it perpetuates that when you say that everyday racism and Black deal with this negativity so much. So that's the reason why I asked, because I felt that in an effort to educate them, that's the way the book would painted Black life. So I wanted to know your thoughts on that, Christy.
I
But
guess
I
my
think the
thought.
white savior thing is real. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Oh, it's definitely real, by the way. But go ahead.
I guess my thoughts are, this is the longest podcast that I've been on with Cut the Bull. Normally they're about an hour, so that's one. Two.
So you must be doing something right, Fatima.
Yes, exactly. Two, between the three of us, let's see, we have 8 degrees, maybe 9 degrees between us. So I think I have a problem with the fact that we've spent now almost 2 hours, you know, trying to educate white people on how they can be better, rather than, you know, using our talents to look within and to help our Black culture, who we know needs work, right? So we're telling white people to do the work. I have a problem with that, because I think that we need to help Black people to be able to do a lot of work in a lot of different areas. That's just my initial thought.
But then I say, if you think that, then do that, right? Like, I'm
Oh, I
focused on
am.
where I see
I
the
am.
biggest problem, but there are plenty of people in this country, and people can pick up whatever priority task that they want to pick up. This is the priority task that I picked up because I want them to dismantle, you know, what they're doing. It's hard to dismantle racism, the system that oppresses you, right? As
But
the
here's the
oppressed
thing.
person.
Here's the
Not
thing. Like,
press.
how long are we going to be on the journey of asking or begging or teaching or pleading white people to be better? How long are we going to be on that journey? I mean, the 4 of us made
What happens
it.
if they don't want to be better?
Yeah, what if they don't want to be? The 4 of us made
I think
it.
plenty of them don't want to be
despite-
better.
despite any racism, despite any obstacles, despite any barriers, we're busting through. I'm running for statewide office in Arizona. Okay. A Black girl, dark skinned with locks in Arizona, so despite any obstacles or anything, we're busting through. So I think, like, how long are we going to keep asking them do something that they might not want to do?
Well, maybe we should stop asking and start demanding.
Maybe we
Or
should
we
stop
just look
saying we're
within and go
oppressed.
take it. Go take our, through education, through helping each other, through, different nonprofits that I know, different avenues that we all operate in. We can then help us move to a place rather than, asking, white people to do something that maybe collectively they don't want to do the work. My third question, is that a Black girl hanging upside down behind you?
She's swinging. She's on the swing. What's wrong with
She's
you?
on a swing. She
What's wrong
is.
with
Charles
you?
has it right. That's by Jonathan Green, who's one of my favorite artists from South
Nice.
Carolina. And so, yes, it's a woman. She's upside down because she is on a swing. So you can't see, but her hands are
Christy.
holding onto a rope. But
Christy,
yeah,
Yes,
so
sir.
you
so
didn't
she's
know
on a
that?
swing.
I haven't seen that piece of art. I'm sorry.
He's a wonderful artist. I really, really love
You're like, but Fatima
I really love his work.
almost slipped up. You're like, Fatima went deep. She's got hanging at the background. She came ready. I'm like, come on.
He's one of my favorite artists. And then over there, you could see a little bit of just a poster of Romare Bearden's The Piano Lesson. And which I remember seeing the play. I forget who did the play. And I think the play then inspired the piece that Romare Bearden did. But yeah, I love artwork, which is why the book also has artwork. And I was very involved in each illustration and then wanted to have a certain kind of cover design. Like, I wanted the person to be whispering because I love art. It's one of my, I'm a frequent goer, to museums. I'm always ready to see some art exhibit, even stuff I don't even like, I'll check it out. Like Jeff Koons, some of his stuff is really out there.
The thing I did like about that is it's not that his art is, not
some of it's pornographic.
But it's also that where they put it. I guess that's what turned me off. Like, I was in Paris, right? You don't go to Paris to go to the Louvre to have his stuff just sitting in the middle of the sidewalk or something. It's like, what's that here? But it just seemed out of place. But maybe that's what turned me off to it. But like Chrissy said, we have gone long, but this has been interesting, and I'm glad you came. And I hope that you enjoyed being here as well. And
I did enjoy it.
And knowing that you're in New York, you and I are gonna have to get together. Because I have some people I want to give I don't want to give, because you gave me a promotional comment. I'm not gonna give that away. Buy some copies and guys, some people that I want to give it to. But I also think that we should do a little book exchange. We should meet. We should talk about this stuff and strangle each other in person. And I set the bar low. The only thing I want to do, you keep pushing what you want to do. All that stuff is great. I want you to stop, because you said it twice, saying that we're oppressed. That's my only way. If I can get you to just say there's things that we need to fix, but not just say blacks are oppressed, I will feel happy. Can I get you to say it now?
Unfortunately, you're going to have to let that one go, because I do think that white people oppress us.
You think you're oppressed?
I do.
Okay. I'm gonna fix that. I'm gonna show you.
I don't know.
The
only way to fix it is to get these oppressors to stop doing their oppression thing.
They're not oppressing you. Even if I get to you to say that they're oppressing some, I need you to understand that they're not oppressing you.
They are, but the thing is when I'm talking about racism, it doesn't require malice, right? It doesn't even require malintent. It just requires somebody to want to continue to make decisions where they opportunity hoard. And as a group, they engage in opportunity hoarding, which then supports the caste system.
But it's not oppression for me to say I want to do what's best for me, and then sometimes that means it's less for someone else. That's human nature. So what you're really saying is you don't want to end racism. That's a hard enough task. You want to fix human nature.
No, it's not just about human nature. This very much comes down on racial lines.
So you don't think blacks want what's best for blacks?
I think I think people are motivated by their
I've
selfish
never heard a black celebrity say, I'm rooting
self-interest,
for the black
regardless
people,
of their
or
race.
I'm staying out of white folks' business, or I care about the black person. So that is rooted in the same thing, right? So if
It's
they
not the
had the
same
power,
because
they
we
would
don't
do the
have the
same
same
thing
sort of
because that's what
societal
they
and
do.
institutional power.
Yes, but that may be true. But if they had the institutional power, they would still hoard it, not because they're black and they don't like whites, because it's what people
How is
do.
it not a Charles? How is it not trying to oppress based on racial lines when you look at what they're trying to do to disenfranchise people enforcing their right to vote?
They're not. Nobody's trying to
Because a lot of
you
these
know what that
policies.
is? That if it is disenfranchisement, it's Republicans trying to disenfranchise Democrats. Just like the Democrats do it when they have control in their states.
Not just Democrats, they're targeting people of color. And yes, sometimes they're happy to wrap in some young people.
Yeah, they're targeting the people that they think are going to
people
vote
with
for the alternative
disabilities
party.
and the like. But it is very much along racial lines.
When
they're doing
me go
gerrymandering, when they're doing all of these things, they're intentionally.
Okay,
well,
so
they're not going to do 3 hours.
Let me ask you a question. In California, when they did, because I'm not saying the Republicans are right. I hate gerrymandering. My only argument is, and it might happen on racial lines, but it's not being done because we don't want the blacks to vote. It's being done because we don't want the blacks who we think will vote against us to vote, right? Here's a good.
And most black people are not going to vote for the Republicans.
Right, which is why they're doing it, but they're not doing it because they're black. Okay, here's my question. If you're being honest, which you have been the whole time. If blacks traditionally voted in a particular state, some southern state where they're doing this, I don't know which state it was. North Carolina was? I don't know. If the blacks in North Carolina traditionally voted Republican, would the Republicans try to suppress their vote?
Depends, but potentially
Probably
not.
not.
I don't
right?
know.
Right. So because it
I mean,
falls.
Can
I finish?
Part of it will be about power,
Yeah,
but
right,
then it might be
right.
trying
So
to
we
support
agree
the
that
power structure that's primarily going to uphold. No.
Because so we agree that it's done because of power, and so if they could, if because along racial lines they vote a certain way and they're doing it, and I'm not in that state, so I'm not going to necessarily accuse them, but I'm going to assume all the arguments are true, and these Republicans are drawing this way because they're doing that. But I know it because I lived in the more liberal states, right? So in Illinois and California did the same thing. California, the reason there's a district that was Republican for 30 years or so. And they redrew the district specifically to draw the Republican out of that district. It worked. And now it's been Democrat for 3 cycles after like 15 cycles. And then they went in after that and said they wanted to draw a largely Hispanic district, right? So technically that's being drawn along racial lines, right? But it's not being done by the right. It's being done by the people in power because that's what humans in power do.
No, but if you look, Charles, if you look at some of the things,
Illinois,
if you look at some of the things that they've done, and I can't remember this, like all the specifics of some of the cases,
it's
like
all
in
the
North
early
Carolina.
voting stuff, and
No, like North Carolina, Alabama, I think maybe even in Ohio, where they have just like straight up the things that they've tried to do, not just with redistricting and gerrymandering.
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying you're wrong about why they're doing it. They're not doing it because it's anti-black racism and they don't want blacks to vote. They're doing it because they're trying to hurt Democrats.
I think it's a multitude of reasons.
It's not
race is one of them.
This is the one time I'm going to flat out say you're wrong. You're wrong. They're doing it because
you have Charles way out of character.
Right, because I never do that. But the evidence is the fact that the Democrats, when they're in control and the Republicans are the weak party, and they're like, give us a crumb.
They'll do that. Both sides will do it. Both sides will do it for gerrymandering. But what I'm talking about, so gerrymandering is one thing, but also when in terms of putting barriers in place so that people have access to the polls, which is different from just gerrymandering, right? So gerrymandering is about your district.
I know polling places.
Where you have,
I know the polling places, the number of polling places, the early voting, and all that kind of stuff. Right. Well, some
or the voter ID thing that we talked about before.
Oh yeah, the voter ID thing. That all right, fine. I can't
no,
believe
but with the voter ID, I mean, if the data shows, like, why do we even need to have, the whole idea of wanting to make people show up and have an identification card when they come is just to put a barrier in place because voter fraud doesn't even happen. We have statistically
voter fraud doesn't happen.
First of all, it's not true.
No, Christy, I'm sorry to say it doesn't happen. Statistically, you have a better chance of being struck by lightning than for there to be voter fraud.
That's not true.
Okay, yeah.
It is true.
It's
I'm
not.
in
I encourage you to
Arizona.
look at the I encourage you to look at the
I don't.
statistics that in my
I
voting
know
rights
it's cold.
chapter
I
from the
know
Brennan
it's
Center
cold.
of Justice. No, the
I'm
data
in
is there.
Arizona where women just went to jail because of voter fraud. They were
But it can't be. It never happened. They must have been struck by lightning first.
yeah, so it's definitely a big issue.
And
Also,
the
Not a
voter
big
problem,
issue. You
Fatima,
guys
is
had that
people
whole recounting and revoting
no,
thing, and
people change
still
the
the votes weren't going
definition
to
of.
change in any significant way.
But
No, voter fraud is not a
now
thing.
you're doing the thing. No, no, no. I'm calling an audible. Now you went from no fraud to it didn't change the vote in any significant way. Two totally separate things.
I talked about two different things. I talked about voter fraud, and then I was talking about the recount. So when I said it didn't change anything in any significant way, I was talking about the recount that happened in
But that
Christie's
doesn't
state of
matter about whether
Arizona.
those are two separate things.
No, that
So
was a
you should have
separate
brought the
thing.
second
But what
one.
I'm
So you
saying is
should have
voter
brought the second
fraud.
one up. We were
Voter
just talking
fraud.
about fraud.
Yeah.
If you are on
Well,
the
no, there was
road,
the recount because there was thinking that there was fraud, but we actually have a very secure system, right? We don't have a system where we
can I
don't
ask
have
you one
voter
quick question?
integrity.
If the system is you live in a district, your name is on the roll, you go up, you say you're that person, you say their address, and you vote. How is that secure? How is that very secure?
You still have to show who you are in the sense, like I
No,
don't
you
know how
don't.
it
You
is in
go up,
Arizona.
you go up, and you
No,
say,
but in New
"I'm here
York,
to vote."
okay, Charles,
They
this is
say,
how it
"Where's
works
your
when we
name?"
vote,
You say,
right? So
"What's
when you go, right, and you have to, and if your signature doesn't match, then you can't vote, and you still have to identify yourself. But even if you think, clearly you think it's some sort of dinky process, but nobody in any significant way is cheating the system.
You
Even
don't
when you
know.
do like absentee. Yes,
if you
I
want
do
to
know.
drive, if you want to drive, you have a driver's license. If you need to cash a check, you have a driver's license. There are programs that will give people money to get driver's license. So to say that some kind of big, huge impediment not to have a driver's license.
It is. Let me try to, I think
is not a huge, that is, to
And
me,
the
that's
only impediment
racism.
is getting the paperwork. Like
It's
if you
not
lost your
racism.
social security number, you lost that
To
stuff.
say
And there's
that
ways
Black
to
look
do
at
that.
the statistic.
Cannot get an ID.
I'm saying that there are hurdles to getting an ID.
Yes, the hurdles is if you lost paperwork.
All right, let me share this statistic with you from my book in chapter 8, the voting rights chapter, specifically about IDs.
Yep.
All right, so in terms of requiring, so 29 million Americans.
Mm-hmm.
When I say Americans, I mean citizens. So 29 million citizens, right, therefore, who are eligible to vote.
Right.
They don't have IDs. That's 12% of the voting age.
And
don't
why?
have an ID.
Why don't they have IDs?
Why?
I don't know why.
Right. So you're not addressing what Christy said. Christy said
some of it might be because they're old, maybe because it's difficult to get an ID card in this. Like, we could say, fine, you can roll up to a DMV and get an ID card, but maybe you need to get like a social security card and your birth certificate and do all this other paperwork. And so it could take a significant amount of time. So if somebody is paycheck to paycheck, working two minimum wage jobs, that's going to be difficult for them. My point is this. This is my point.
We cover the fees, so don't tell me they don't have enough money for it.
This is not just the fees. This is my point. Why are we clinging to the voter ID issue when we know statistically that there isn't voter fraud in any significant way? And if
there's two problems.
It is true. And if, hold on, let me find you those statistics.
There's two problems
so
with
if
what you're
we
saying.
know
Why you
what
look
is
for the
not
statistic.
true, then all that does is make it harder for people to vote. So we're trying, it's like a solution in search of a problem. Go for it.
Are you going to let us answer your question?
I said, go for it.
All right. So the problem is, one, you're saying that there's no fraud when you want somebody to prove a negative. If somebody gets away with the fraud, not that everybody does. Christy gave you two examples. I can give you some in Illinois, in Ohio, in Michigan. So It's not like it never happens. Is it rare? It's rare that they get caught. You don't know how often
it's significantly rare.
That's like saying how many things are stolen from a store. How many items are stolen from a store if the store is never reported? Then how do you know how many things? How would you know how many things were stolen?
Let me share this with you. Let me share this with you. No, Charles, let me share this with you. So the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU that focuses on a broad range of things. Some of it is around voting issues, right?
Yeah.
So the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU's law school found voter fraud incident rates of 0.0003% to 0.0025%. That is so negligible, not even
It's not
close to
multiple.
1%. And most reported incidents of voter fraud actually were traceable to other sources like clerical error or bad data matching practices, and concluding that Americans are more likely to be struck by lightning than for someone to impersonate another person at the polls. We have 5 states that have mail-in ballots, right? Primarily as their voting method. That's Colorado, Hawaii, Oregon, Utah, and Washington. Since the year 2000, over 250 million votes have been counted and cast by mail.
In those 5 states or everywhere?
Yeah, and then in 2018, over 31 million people voted by mail. So that's 25.8% of the election participants. Virtually none of the states whose elections are primarily conducted by mail had voter fraud. Oregon sent out over 100 million ballots.
How do you know who are mailing them in?
Let me finish. Oregon sent out over 100
But you're
million
not
mail-in
answering my
ballots.
question.
Let me
You're
just
just
finish
reading
the
your book to
sentence.
me.
I know because I'm sharing you this. Let me finish the
You're saying,
sentence.
wait. You're saying
Please let me finish this. Let me finish the sentence. Oregon sent out over 100 million mail-in ballots since 2000, right? And documented only a dozen confirmed fraud incidents. That's 0.00001%. And that is why I'm saying voter fraud is not really a thing, because it's not even close to even 0.0001%. It doesn't happen in any significant way. So the fact that you can find one out of 100 million ballots cast, okay, so there was one, okay, but that's not statistically significant.
100 million ballots times the percentage you gave us the first time is 25,000 votes. It's not one vote. So
I'm just saying,
in your argument right off the bat, you're claiming that 25,000 errors or fraudulent ballots is negligible.
That's not 25,000. That was 0.000 something.
Yes, 100 million times 0.00025 is 25,000.
No.
I know in Arizona, this is how it works. When you have a mail-in ballot, you sign it and you want to drop it off, you go and you drop it off. There's been instances proven that those have not been checked. So they don't check it when you drop it off. You just put it in the box. No one is really doing voter identification, like comparing signatures. It's not a secure system. You also mentioned Arizona election. This is probably something you don't know. Abe Hamadeh, and I was intimately involved in last cycle's election, so I know, he lost by 200 and something votes. Do you know how many, and I just looked it up, do you know how many votes were never counted?
10,000.
I'm sure it's going to be some number more than the 200 something.
10,000.
It's about 6,000 and something, give or, you know.
Can I say something?
They're refusing to count those.
And what I want to say to that, Fatima,
I mean, wait, let me ask you that. No, let me ask Christy this question.
You're not letting us talk. That's my problem. We let you read a whole section and I can't
just ask Christy a question.
I just want 30 seconds. You read a whole section of the book. You read the book to me. Can I get 30 seconds? So to the people who say every vote should count, right? That's a lot of people say. Is that what happened? So it happened to me once. I went to vote and they said I voted already. Right? I'm not saying somebody else came to say to me it was error. They said you voted already. So they let you vote. You are 100% right. They don't. So you vote. You vote in the provisional ballot. They stick it in the box. They put it in the can. So all they do is they'll say we'll count those ballots if the margin is wide enough that we need to. But I thought the argument was to count every vote. So my vote only counts if somebody loses. If there's 1,000 in there and somebody loses by 1,001. If he loses by 1,001, you don't count. If he loses by 999, you count. So you're not counting my vote. So I thought you said every vote counts. So that's the first thing, right?
That's
then you
different
want to
from
prove
fraud.
you want to prove a negative. You want to say, well, there must not be fraud because people haven't been caught for fraud. That doesn't make sense. And then Christie told you people got called. You're like, well, that's 2 people. Then I give you another 10, but that's only 12 people. So to
What
say
I'm
it
saying, it
never
is not
happens,
statistically significant. But
but
I
you're
want to
not
ask
saying you're
Christy this
moving the
question.
goalposts. You first adamantly stood on the stack of your books and said there is no voter fraud. They said, well,
Yeah.
it's not statistically
Well, that's
measured.
what I
I
meant
mean,
by it.
people
But,
could say
no, let me ask Christy this
Uh-huh.
question. Okay, here's my question for you. Do you believe that Donald Trump won the last presidential election?
that is not even relevant to what we're talking about here. So let me go to what I was about to ask. You're saying the analogy can be made with racism, right? You can't always prove that racism exists,
But believe
you're
them.
saying that it exists, even though you can't necessarily prove it. There's no way that we can prove in high numbers that fraud exists within our election system, but we know it does based on the number of people that, have said that, like Charles said, they said that he voted, or people are being mailed ballots to people that don't even live in the state, or people are being mailed out ballots for people that have died and other people are turning them in.
People going to their old address and voting and then voting in their new district.
Yep. So to say
these things are not happening in any significant way.
But are they happening? So I want
There's always going to be.
So I want no murder, and you want just a few murders. That's what we're agreeing on. Well, just have a
No,
few
what I
murders.
see that
I
this
don't
is
need
a
no murders, just a
futile
few.
argument, because
Just
what
a
it
few
is
murders.
it's sort of like if you could find one person on the planet who engages in it, therefore we need to blow up the whole system and think that we
We're not
don't
gonna
have
blow up
voter
the system.
integrity.
It's
No,
getting
that's
a
where we
voter
are.
ID.
That's where we
It's
are
getting-
in the
Asking for an ID is
conversation.
blowing up the system.
It's getting an ID. That's the basic.
No, at the core of it is whether or not there's election integrity and if there is any significant fraud taking place. There is no significant fraud
You
taking
have no
place.
way of knowing that. That makes no
I
sense.
do.
when
There
you
are all
speak
these
like you
people
do.
that have done studies and they
Yeah,
investigate when people
There's people who've
complain.
done studies that say a lot of it. There's people done studies that said 10,000 people are killed by police every year, and they're not. There's people who've done
Okay,
studies
well
that
then
say
it's like
all
you want
kinds
to
of things that
believe
are not
you
true.
want to
If you
believe
want to make up the study, you can have it.
one
But
person's
most of these
Charles,
people
one
go into an
person's
argument with a
experience is
study
not
because they
valid
already
data.
believe
let me
something.
put like a pin on this based on the last
Sure.
elections and what happened in Arizona. So I was at the polls during the last election, just poll watching, observing. I was there at like 6 o'clock. By 6:30 a.m., the machines started going down. This is something that I witnessed for myself. I was driving around the different locations, monitoring what was happening. In largely Republican-only district, machines started going down. We found out later that machines were going down because they used the wrong size paper, right? That type of thing doesn't happen. It suppressed the vote. It's why you said all of these appeals have happened. Well, what you don't know is they're still going on. Abe Hamadeh is still fighting his case, the person that should have been attorney general, based on all of the shenanigans that happened on that day. So are our elections secure? They can be a lot better. Voter ID, go back to precinct voting, go back to on the day, make it a national holiday. Election day, not election month. There are things we can do to tighten up it's not a perfect system.
Right.
I'm not saying it's a perfect system, but I'm also saying I don't think we need. Yeah, we don't have an election integrity issue.
It's not secure
in any significant way.
Somebody put it this way, if somebody wanted to cheat, could they?
Yeah, of course somebody could if they wanted to cheat. If
it was secure, they wouldn't be able to do it even if they wanted to.
Okay, but we're going down a rabbit hole, and this is illogical thinking. I mean, that's just the reality of the pathway that we're on. Okay, because if we could always find some outlier, some anomaly, and therefore you want to base an entire policy around something that is not happening in a significant way.
Well, I guess like my problem
voter
is
ID.
You're talking about empowering, or you're not talking about empowering Black people. I'm talking about empowering Black people by saying that Black people cannot get the basic voter ID and that they're being suppressed because we're mandating that they have an ID to vote is the definition of racism.
No, it's not. My question is this. Here's my question. If we just accept this, because otherwise we won't get to the rest of the question. Okay, so let's just accept that voter fraud is not a problem. Okay, Otherwise, you won't get the rest of the question. So if we can accept that voter fraud is not happening in any significant way, and if we have a secure system with election integrity, so we take that, just stipulate that that's the reality, okay?
Yes.
So if that's the reality, and we know that's the case,
Right.
then why have voter ID when we know that it is going to be an impediment for some
It's
people to
not.
vote?
It's not an
But
impediment.
no, you got to answer a question, Chrissy. Be fair. To answer a question as presented, the answer is we wouldn't need it. Not only because it's not because it is an impediment to some people, you just wouldn't need it because of the prerequisites you set. You said that it's secure, there's no fraud, and whatever. Why do you need ID? The honest answer is you don't.
Right. And
I
that's
just don't
why I
accept
have the
the things you
position
said.
that I
I
do.
just don't
I
accept the things.
understand you
I
don't
just
accept
don't
the
accept
facts that I
the
presented.
things you told me to accept.
I understand you don't understand
But
what I
if you
said.
But
need
if
an
I had
ID,
to accept them, then I would agree. You don't need an ID.
if you need an
Okay.
ID to go into a bank to cash a check, I don't think you can cash a check without having an ID. So to vote in an election, why wouldn't you need an ID?
Well, here's a
You
better
already
question.
have
I got
to
a better question.
verify,
So,
you already have to
Fatima, you got to
verify
ask your
yourself at
question.
the
Here's the better
beginning.
question. Here's the better question. If without voter IDs, the Democrats lost 6 elections in a row, would they be asking for voter IDs?
If the Democrats lost,
Yeah.
I would not
No,
change my
that's not what I asked.
position.
No, I didn't ask you about what you said. I asked you about the Democrats, and I didn't ask you about if they lost once. 6 presidential elections in a row they lost.
Okay. I
They
still
wouldn't want to
wouldn't,
change the system?
I wouldn't want to change the system
But
if we
what
had
the
a secure
Democrats
system.
want to change the system. You're not the Democrats. You're Fatima.
I don't know what they would want to do.
Yes, you do. Because we just had a conversation about power. So obviously they
Yeah,
want
but
to make changes.
but I don't think that they would point the issue towards voter ID as the
They
need
would
to
want to,
change the
I didn't say
system.
idea. I said, would they want to change the system?
They may want to
See,
change something about it, but not the
we
voter
were
ID
having
issue.
such a nice,
I
intelligent
know.
conversation. I blame Charles for taking us down
Well, I
this
didn't bring up voter
rabbit
ID. You
hole.
two did. I'm not a partisan like you two.
Well, but the core issue is like we are just straight up not and probably never going to agree on the voter fraud issues around election integrity,
Nope.
and we won't agree about
Just
an insurrection.
we won't
and,
agree that we're oppressed.
and
You're
we
oppressed.
won't
Introduce you to
agree.
Jake.
You're
The
We
oppressed
won't-
showman's
and we're
name is
not.
Jake. We should have
Okay,
a
and Jake
Zoom.
needed more jail time. Jake needed
Jake is a nice
more
guy.
jail. I don't
All right,
care.
well,
He
we
needed
got to end the
more
podcast, so
jail
I got a
time.
perfect place we can end the podcast, Christy. I don't know about Christy, but Fatima and Charles are going to end on a positive note. We can agree that people need to keep their damn dogs on a leash.
Yes, they do. Okay, because I don't want to step in their dog shit.
Oh,
Okay.
look, I'm going to sit
You
away.
New
Yeah.
Yorkers.
Oh, it's all over.
And if we're already talking about dogs, why do people show up with their dog in like a little baby Bjorn? Okay, why are they going to the store?
I plead the fifth. I think it's time to go.
Oh,
I have-
see. All right, Fatima, we're going to make a
Not
deal.
one of those people on the plane with your supposed service animal that doesn't know how to serve anything. Okay.
Look, you might have worn me down, Fatima, because it's getting late, but I will give you everything you wanted in the book. I will give you that there's no fraud. I will give you that everyday racism exists. We got to cheat everything in your book. I will give you if we can end by agreeing on the dogs.
Okay, we can agree on the dogs, but not the oppression thing. Don't hit me with the oppression thing.
The poop all, no, you can have that too. Poop all over the streets, and the fact that it is not necessarily, in fact, I don't even think that's who you write it for the most, that these white liberals need to understand what you're teaching, that they're not ending racism by like always yelling, because it will help me. I mean, I'm telling you, I get yelled at every month about, well, that school is failing because you don't care about how many Black kids go to that school. And you don't understand this, that, or the other. These are all the white liberals on that side. Look at how much I care.
I know you said you're on the Board of Education. I have to look that up.
They put on the T-shirts. They put on the T-shirts and like, we care about Blacks. We need to get rid of these people who don't care about Blacks. Like Charles. You know what I said? I'll leave you with this. You know what I said that made them call me racist the first time? We were talking about selective enrollment schools and that kind of thing. I think you wrote a bit about that. And I was like, look, We need, if you want, we need more Black kids to be able to have access to those same schools. We need to fix the schools that they're in. So you got majority Black and brown elementary schools that are failing. And you're like, well, why don't we just pick the best 3 or 4 kids we can and pop them in these schools in Manhattan? You're doing that not to help those kids, to pat yourself on the back. What I propose is that you fix their schools. And they say, well, that takes resources. Then give them whatever resources they need.
I
Because
want
I
these
want to
schools
fix.
to be fixed. I'm not for I'm not in favor of charter schools. I'm not in favor of siphoning off the money so that they can come up with a whole new system.
Right, but you
This is
agree
a
that the schools should be
whole
fixed.
part 2.
But hold on, Christy. But I want to.
Christy, it's clear.
I'm
Look,
huge
you can
ESA.
assume.
Wait,
No,
stop. I think she's
Christy,
going to agree
it
with me,
is
though.
clear. It is clear before I even showed up for this podcast, right? For this conversation, it was clear where I was on the political spectrum, right? So you could assume I would not be for charter schools.
Right.
You could assume that I would not be for
You
voter
could assume
ID.
she was
It
going to be
in my
crazy.
book.
No, I'm just saying. But
I am not crazy.
but listen, but you agree with me that we should fix their schools, right? So you got
I
majority
think we
Black
should
and
be
brown.
fixing. I think we should be fixing schools. I don't know
I mean,
what
all
are you
schools,
talking
of
about?
course.
Public schools?
But I'm saying,
Yeah.
I mean, every kid should succeed, blah blah blah. But I'm saying,
And we shouldn't be funding those schools in Brooklyn that get the yeshiva schools that somehow are not meeting the state standard, but are still taking state money.
but I'm saying specific to majority inner city Black and brown schools where kids are struggling. What is wrong with focusing on those schools to improve the academic achievement of those schools? Find out what they need, if it's resources, money, whatever the resources. That's what I'm saying. Address
I want
the
the
need.
schools to be fixed. I don't know all of what you're talking about, what would be in a policy package.
No,
but I don't want children to go to any shitty school.
But yeah,
I
but
mean,
listen to what I'm
these
saying.
children have a right to go to
We
the
didn't
school
even
that's
get
in
to
their
the point.
neighborhood and
But
to get a good
Fatima,
education.
we didn't even have an opportunity to get to the point of what the package would be. All I said was, if their schools are failing, you as members of the DOE don't have the right to have a failing school. You're failing if you have a failing school. Not if some of them are failing. You should have no failing schools. So you should fix those schools and do whatever it's in your power, in your control, to improve the educational opportunities for those Black and brown kids in those schools at the elementary school level, so more of them would achieve higher. And they called me racist and said I don't care about Black people, Black kids.
I don't know what else went in there for them
No, I
to
can tell
say
you what it
that.
is. If they think the easy fix is to let the schools languish and then pick the best 3 or 5 kids out of that school and then put them in a selective enrollment school and say, see, we
No,
have more
I
Black
don't think
kids.
they should cherry pick the best kids.
They should fix the school.
Yes. I just don't know what all is in your package.
I didn't.
But as presented, I agree.
But I'm saying
that
we can't get to a package because when I made that, I said, well, why don't we do what needs to be done for those students to improve more of them? And they said, shut up, racist. They're like, you don't care about Black kids because you want to do the heavy lifting of fixing the kids to school for all the kids. Why can't we just, get a few more Blacks in this school and then we can pat ourselves on the back and say, yay, there's 3% more Blacks in this school here at a high school level, let's say middle school level, as opposed to fixing the 500 students at a given school. And that's what my problem is. You're not hoping the larger number of students you can help because you're focused on how it will feel to have your affluent kid go to school with a couple more Black kids.
As presented, I will agree.
Gosh, you can't even give me that. So the offer on the table was I would give you everything you want, and you got to say,
assume there's something
yeah,
in there that I'm just not aware of.
I want to clean. Yes, I don't want to. Well, in the case, unless you said some other words that you didn't tell me, I just wanted yes. That's all I want. Yes.
Qualifier. That is my qualifier, which is why I said as presented. As stated, yes, I agree.
She doesn't trust you, Charles.
Look, but Christy, I even did her. She said, if you do this and you do this and do this, and we agree that there's no voter fraud, we do this, then answer the question. What did I say? And what did I say? I said yes.
Statement as presented.
I just
Let's
said yes.
talk
We don't
about
need
the
voter
school
ID.
thing on round 2 because I have a lot to say about ESAs and homeschool.
Would you come back, Fatima?
And all
yes,
that.
I would come back.
We didn't attack you too bad.
No, I mean, I enjoyed the conversation. I knew that we weren't going to agree.
You did.
This was not This was not a conversation of like vitriol or, there was
Well,
no
stop a
attacking
minute.
going on. Like, we
I
don't.
gotta sign off the show. At some point, we gotta close this thing. So she is Fatimah Gilliam, the author Gilliam. See, now I did the last one trying to get the first one right. See, the yip was going to happen. Author of Race Rules, but your black friend won't tell you. Fatimah, it's been great having you on. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
God bless the US of A, land of the free and a home of the brave. God get all of the praise. I got a country to save, cause I'm Patriot J and I'm saving a day.